Chapter 425. What do you mean? Do you think I'm a mute? Putting down the chopsticks in his hand, the beef that is the most delicious for others is indeed delicious in Zhang Hai's mouth. But Zhang Hai doesn't lack these, so he usually eats freely. It doesn't matter if he eats less, but if he holds this anger in his heart and doesn't let it out, it will kill him. Of course not, we can't suffer in silence. But when she heard Zhang Hai's words, Xueqi spoke first. She now knows that Zhang Hai still doesn't fully trust her. If she stands in the wrong position, Zhang Hai will really leave. Although she is thinking for Zhang Hai, it seems that she has to consider Zhang Hai's inner thoughts. Then what do you think we should do? Looking at Xueqi in front of him, Zhang Hai said with a serious face. Seeing this, Xueqi waved to Master Zhang who was cooking. Master Zhang nodded politely and left first. At this time, although Zhang Hai doesn't fully trust all the people in this room, at least Xueqi does. At least if we want to do it, we have to plan how to kill him in one blow, how to deal with the next thing, who to find to do it. These are all things we need to consider. Looking at Zhang Hai, Xueqi said with a serious face. Leave this to me. I came here with the boss to do this job. Hearing Xueqi's words, Azalina slowly picked up a piece of beef in front of her, stuffed it into her mouth, and then said to Xueqi with a smile. You! Looking at Azalina, Xueqi couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. Originally, she thought that Azalina was Zhang Hai's new lover, or like Penelope, a lawyer's assistant or something like that, but she didn't expect that she would actually say that she wanted to solve it. Let me introduce you, Azalina Vocabrio, former KGB agent, now my bodyguard. Looking at Xueqi's surprised look, Zhang Hai's heart calmed down a little. He picked up a piece of beef and ate it while talking. Excuse me. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Xueqi couldn't help but hesitate, but she didn't expect Zhang Hai to have such an expert around him. It seems that Zhang Hai didn't come here casually, he came here prepared. Originally, she thought that Zhang Hai was so angry that he lost his head and directly came to fight with Zhangwu. It seems that he unknowingly received a very good team. The beauty in front of him turned out to be an agent that he only saw in the movies? So amazing. Since we have people, then we also need to prepare. Goodbye, we need to know the time and place of the attack. If possible, we need to uproot the family once and for all. If only one or two people are caught, the rest will be on guard, then it will be difficult to deal with them. Looking at Azalina in front of her, Xueqi said slowly. Up to you. Hearing Xueqi's words, Zhang Hai shrugged his shoulders. Originally, according to what he said, they should directly break into their house and then exterminate their family. But just like what Xueqi said, they should have done it right. This is not the United States. Here, as a rich man, he has no privileges. The domestic and foreign situations are completely different. In foreign countries, it is the world of the gold standard. Money is everything, especially in Europe and the United States. If you have money, it means that the local government has to rely on you to live. If you have money, it means that the local police are your personal bodyguards. If you have money, it means that you have everything. But in China, no matter how rich a person is, he is actually just a pig raised by the court. They can kill you whenever they want. Lawyers, laws, they have to serve the court, but abroad, they serve the rich. Of course, whether it is at home or abroad, ordinary people have the least human rights. This is very clear. Since there is no way to directly kill the family and directly kill the family, then let Xueqi think of a way. Bang, bang, bang. Just as Xueqi was thinking of a way, the door of their private room suddenly rang. This made Xueqi frown involuntarily. After all, she had ordered not to disturb them unless there is a big matter. Is the restaurant manager tired of his job? How dare he ignore my words? Seeing Xueqi's dissatisfaction, the assistant immediately received the signal and walked to the door leisurely. After opening the door, he looked at the person outside the door unhappily and said coldly, "What's the matter?" Seeing the assistant open the door, the restaurant manager could not help but say a little awkwardly, "Sir, you must see Chairman Qi." "Oui." Seeing the assistant open the door, the restaurant manager could not help but say a little awkwardly. He naturally knew of Xueqi's orders, but he could not afford to offend the person beside him. "Okay, you don't have to say any more. Sorry, this is a private party, so it is not convenient for us to entertain you. Please feel free to do as you wish." Looking at the tall and thin young man standing beside the manager, the assistant here did not have a good expression. However, the young man ignored the assistant and said directly, "Sorry, your level is not high enough." However, the young man ignored the assistant and said directly. Then, he jumped over the manager and directly pushed the door open. The assistant behind the door was almost pushed to the ground by him. Seeing that this person actually dared to make a move, the manager had already signaled to the security guards in the distance. If this guy dared to make a move, even if he was from the imperial court, they would dare to take him down first. After all, this country still had to maintain harmony on the surface. Mr. Zhang, hello, my name is Zhu Wan. I am from the National Security Council. I feel that we can talk. However, after this person entered the room, he did not take the next step. Instead, he stood in front of Zhang Hai and said with a serious face, "National Security Council? National Security Agency?" Listening to this person's words, Zhang Hai was stunned for a moment, then said with a smile, "Since the National Security Agency is here, will there be some Dragon Group, Phoenix Group, and so on in a while?" If these things really existed, Zhang Hai would have poisoned himself to death. How could he be so shameless? After all, this was a farming novel. Our country does not have a national security agency, only a Ministry of National Security. Our National Security Council is subordinate to the Ministry of National Security. I came to contact you this time to discuss with you about Mr. Du Feynman Weha Muhammad bin Radi Al Maktoum. However, looking at Zhang Hai, the young man did not act too arrogantly and continued to speak. "Sit." Originally when he came in, Zhang Hai had already wanted to drive him away, but when he heard that he came to talk to him about Du Feynman, Zhang Hai couldn't help but feel a little puzzled because he was really curious. What does Du Feynman have to do with him? Pointing to a position in the distance, Zhang Hai said to him. The man did not hesitate and walked in directly and sat in that position. As for Qi Li, she winked at the assistant who almost fell down. Although the assistant was very reluctant, she still stood up and closed the door. "I came to Mr. Zhang this time mainly because I was assigned by my superiors to ask Mr. Zhang to do us a favor." After sitting down, the man did not say much and directly said to Zhang Hai, "What do you mean?" After eating another piece of beef, Zhang Hai said slowly. He was not in the mood to talk nonsense with him. "At your level, I don't think I need to talk too much nonsense. Our country is short of oil, very short of oil, and the Middle East is an oil-producing area. But in recent years, the power of the United States and European countries in the Middle East has increased instead of decreased, which has made us very unlucky. So this time, Prince Du Feynman came here because the higher-ups want to get the oil supply from the Middle East through him." Seeing that Zhang Hai was not very patient to listen to him, the man quickly said. He now knew the situation in the country. Not to mention that Zhang Hai's foundation was not in the country. Even if it was in the country, young people nowadays would rarely pay attention to the imperial court if it was not for their own interests. You can say that these people are free or rebellious, but this is the reality now. The education of patriotism made the young people hate the Japanese, hate the Americans, hate the Koreans, hate the Indians, hate the Indonesian monkeys. But when they were really asked to contribute their property to the country, 99 out of 100 people would disagree. This was the selfishness of human beings. After all, it was not a few decades ago, where everything could be sacrificed for a single sentence. So at this time, talking about the country or ethnic group to others was nonsense. Interests were the most important. Oil? Isn't there no oil in Dubai? When he heard the word oil, Zhang Hai's heart skipped a beat. Did the imperial court also know about his 400 million oil futures? But fortunately, after listening to the conversation, he found out that it was not about his oil, but that the imperial court was eyeing the oil in the Middle East. That did make sense. His oil futures were worth $400 million, and the state wouldn't be able to buy them. Even if he sold them for $6 each, $400 million would only be $4 billion. Including the added value, it would only be slightly more than $30 billion. The country spent trillions of dollars every year. 30 billion was just a drop in the ocean. Of course, he would not brag about it. The Middle East had always been the backyard of the United States and European countries. How could they let Xia get involved? Dubai doesn't have any oil, but the Arab countries are one. Apart from the other countries, the oil in the other countries will also be held by the royalty of the other countries. This time, Mr. Du Feynman is here to check on our country's high-speed rail construction. He's very likely to introduce a high-speed rail project to Dubai. However, this project is also our strong suit, so we're very confident about it. But regarding the oil issue, we need a guide to help us. At this point, it was obvious that the country was interested in his personal relationship with Du Feynman, and wanted him to be the lobbyist. Looking at the person in front of him, Zhang Hai smiled. It did not matter if he was the lobbyist. After all, he was just mentioning it. He did not represent the country. But then again, like what he said just now, he could be the lobbyist, but what about the benefits? Chapter 426. Tell me what you want. Looking at Zhang Hai's playful eyes, the young man couldn't help but frown. Sure enough, this guy wasn't easy to get along with. Looking at Zhang Hai's appearance, the young man knew that the imperial court would have to pay a price. However, the imperial court is not his. He just came here to ask Zhang Hai for help. As long as Zhang Hai is willing to help, the imperial court will pay some price. Looking at Zhang Hai in front of him, the young man said calmly, "It seems that the imperial court is not sincere. If I don't know anything, why would I send someone here? Let's talk about it when you think about what you can give me." Zhang Hai really doesn't know how to negotiate, but he is not stupid. It is not good for him to reveal his trump card too early, so he just smiled, then picked up the teacup in front of him. Since ancient times, Huaxia has a saying that the guest should be served with dishes and sent off. The only person here who can be regarded as a guest is this young man. This young man has naturally received professional training, so he naturally knows the reason why Zhang Hai did this, so he didn't say much. He stood up directly, nodded to Zhang Hai, and left the room. He just came here to convey the message of the higher-ups. The specific negotiation depends on Zhang Hai and their higher-ups. Zhang Hai, do you really want to agree with them? Seeing this person leave, Xueqi, who was sitting next to Zhang Hai, couldn't help but ask hesitantly. Based on her understanding of the imperial court, it was true that privately cooperating with the imperial court would earn some reputation, but other than reputation, there was nothing else. It was inevitable that they would lose money. In the eyes of these merchants, money was much more useful than reputation. There is no such thing as agreeing or not. Let's see their sincerity. Anyway, my business is not in the country. We will talk about it when the time comes. This person is just a small fry. If I release my goodwill, there will probably be a big shot coming to talk to me tomorrow. This is also one of the opportunities to kill the Yin family. Looking at Xueqi in front of him, Zhang Hai narrowed his eyes and said with a smile, "The main purpose of Zhang Hai's coming here is to kill the Yin family. If he makes it clear, the imperial court will naturally help him." Okay. Looking at Zhang Hai's appearance, Xueqi hesitated for a moment, nodded, and then changed the topic. For her, there is nothing that makes her happier than making money through the restaurant. Of course, if Zhang Hai can understand her intentions, it is indeed something that makes her happier than making money through the restaurant. After the meal, Zhang Hai and the others returned to the hotel. As for Xueqi, she went home. Lying on the big bed in the hotel, Zhang Hai scrolled through the two numbers on his phone. AI Xiaoxi and Feng Yunchen. To be honest, although they hadn't been gone for long, and they kept in touch with each other on the phone and the internet, Zhang Hai missed them a little. After all, they were the only two women in the world who had confirmed their relationship with him. What? Aphrodite? Zhang Hai can only say that Aphrodite was an accident. He really didn't want to touch the girls around him. Now that they are in the capital, to be honest, Zhang Hai misses them even more. But after looking at it for a while, Zhang Hai put down the phone. If it was before he knew about the Yin family's power, Zhang Hai would call them. But now Zhang Hai has to consider more. For example, if they fail, how can they escape? Zhang Hai already regretted bringing Delina, Marian, and Penelope daily, not to mention adding more people. After hesitating for a moment, Zhang Hai patted his head and threw the phone aside. Let's talk about it after the matter here is over. After all, he flew for more than 10 hours and had to adjust to the jet lag. Zhang Hai was also a little tired. The next morning, he didn't get up. Instead, he slept until 10 o'clock before he was awakened by a knock on the door. Wearing pajamas, he walked to the door in a daze. After opening the door, he found that the person who knocked on the door was none other than the staff of the Ministry of State Security who came to see him last night. Behind him, there was a middle-aged man in his 40s who looked very energetic. This middle-aged man was about 1. 75 meters tall and looked very decent. He wore a pair of black-rimmed glasses and looked more like a scholar than a lackey of the imperial court. Cough. A government official. The first impression he gave was not bad. Hello, Mr. Jiang. We meet again. This is my superior, Mr. Chao Weiqing. He has full authority to talk to you about the topic that we didn't finish last night. Looking at Zhang Hai, who opened the door, the young man here said with a serious face. Yes, please come in. Looking at the two people in front of him, Zhang Hai was stunned for a moment. Then he smiled and waved his hand, indicating that they could come in. The two people didn't say much and went straight in. They looked around the suite. Although they belong to the court, they usually don't have many opportunities to live in suites of this level. Especially the young man after walking in. His eyes were still shining. He really didn't know how this Zhang Hai, who is about the same age as him, can live in such a good suite. Why is he still a small staff, but he can already live in such a good suite and become friends with a member of the Dubai royal family? Most importantly, he has such a beautiful wife, Qi Li. Yes, one night is enough for these people to investigate Zhang Hai's background. They all know that Zhang Hai is the supplier of beef to Qi Li's restaurant. At the same time, they also know that Zhang Hai is Qi Li's husband. Take a seat first. There is something to drink in the fridge. I just got up and need to wash up. Zhang Hai looked at the two people in front of him and said casually. Then, he walked into the bathroom in his room and started to wash up. This is the bad habit that Zhang Hai has developed after staying in the United States for a while. He doesn't treat his officials as leaders. After all, in the United States, a rich person like him is in the privileged class. Officials are nothing in front of him. For someone like him, he basically ignores the town mayor and the mayor. Of course, he is still very humble when it comes to the governor and the president. However, when his wealth accumulates to a certain extent, even the governor and the president need to see him to ask for political funds. Then, he can really do whatever he wants in the United States. As long as he doesn't do anything outrageous, no one will find trouble with him. Of course, this is all nonsense now. At present, he is only the richest man in Winthrop. However, this habit has already allowed him to ignore many officials in the country. This is completely different from last year at this time. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, the two people on the other side were stunned. Then, the young man's face showed a trace of displeasure. However, the middle-aged man didn't care. He still had a smile on his face as he looked at Zhang Hai's room. After about 10 minutes, Zhang Hai finished washing his face, brushing his teeth, and washing his hair. He walked out of the room again. He casually sat in front of the two people and nodded at them. Seeing Zhang Hai sit down, the middle-aged man opposite him said with a smile, "Mr. Zhang, you are really young." Looking at the information, Mr. Zhang should be less than 30 years old. You are not even 30 years old, yet you have such a large family fortune. You are really a hero from a young age. He said this for a reason. Firstly, he wanted to flatter Zhang Hai. Secondly, he wanted to tell Zhang Hai that they have already investigated his situation. If Zhang Hai still wants to play some tricks, then there is no need to. I like to do things directly. I don't like our country's tradition of beating around the bush. I know that you represent the imperial court, so you must have already investigated my situation. I can also help the imperial court talk to Du Feynman about the oil and high-speed rail. However, I still want to ask the same question. What can the imperial court give me? Looking at Du Feynman in front of him, Zhang Hai smiled and said faintly. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, the middle-aged man also looked at him seriously. Isn't serving the country a virtue that a Huaxia person should have? Why do you say that? After looking at him for about 10 seconds, the middle-aged man said slowly. It was obvious that he was ready to flatter Zhang Hai. Upon hearing his words, Zhang Hai immediately waved his hand and said hurriedly, "Stop. If the imperial court is not sincere, then forget it." He wouldn't throw away the benefits that he got just because some people said a few words. Although he needed these people to do him a small favor and gather the family's people, he wouldn't give up the benefits that he deserved. Most importantly, he wanted to distance himself from the family's matter. That was the most important thing. Seeing that Zhang Hai was about to leave, the middle-aged man stretched out his hand to stop him and said slowly, "Brother Zhang, don't be too anxious. The imperial court represents a country. They definitely won't bow to anyone. Therefore, There are no conditions or sincerity. However, the imperial court can give you some help and compensation. Seeing that Zhang Hai was about to leave, the middle-aged man didn't know whether it was true or not. In fact, to put it bluntly, this was the art of Huaxia language. The imperial court wouldn't bow to anyone, any force, or any country. However, if you worked for the imperial court would definitely help you. It was just like being a civil servant, and the imperial court would pay you a salary. The imperial court would always be high and mighty. Therefore, in other words, it depended on whether Zhang Hai wanted face or benefits. For Zhang Hai, face was more important than the sky. Therefore he chose benefits. Oh, then what is the imperial court's compensation and help? I'm curious. After sitting down again, Zhang Hai said calmly, the imperial court won't be of much help to you in the United States. I don't think you want the imperial court's shadow in your manner. This won't be good for you in the United States. If you are targeted by the United States government, then it will be troublesome. Therefore, the imperial court will mainly help you in China. I know you are selling things to China. The imperial court will give you the first advantage. That is, if you sell your things into China, you won't have to pay customs taxes. Looking at Zhang Hai, the middle-aged man said the first condition. However, Zhang Hai curled his lips when he heard this. What could he sell? How much customs tax could he get from selling beef? He was going for the high-end sales, not the volume. Chapter 427. Seeing Zhang Hai curl his lips slightly, the middle-aged man sighed in his heart. In fact, when he heard this condition, he couldn't help but be stunned. This was because he also knew that Zhang Hai was taking the quality route. His beef was mainly sold on the high-end route, not the quantity. 1,000 cows, even 10,000 cows, a cow can be slaughtered for a few hundred pounds of meat. 10,000 cows can be slaughtered for a few million pounds of meat. It was not a small amount, enough for a person to eat for a lifetime. But the problem was that there were 1.3 billion people in Huaxia. Millions of kilograms of beef was nothing in the market. Of course, it was very expensive as a whole. 1 kilogram was sold for 2,400 yuan, so millions of kilograms were worth 12 billion yuan in total. But according to the customs tax, the beef only had to pay more than 10 million yuan in customs tax. It was not easy to ask Zhang Hai to help with a customs tax of more than 10 million yuan. Don't worry. There is a second condition. We can exempt the cheese restaurant from business tax, urban construction tax, and individual income tax. Seeing that Zhang Hai was a little impatient, the middle-aged man immediately said the second condition. Hearing this, Zhang Hai frowned more deeply. Because the Western restaurant of the cheese restaurant was built by Qi Li, and all the money it earned belonged to her. But it had nothing to do with Zhang Hai. He and Qi Li were not really a couple, so it had nothing to do with him. Seeing Zhang Hai frowning more deeply, the middle-aged man panicked. Indeed, Zhang Hai did not lack money for the first benefit. But for the second benefit, Zhang Hai should be very tempted. According to the current business situation of the cheese restaurant, the net profit every day was more than 2 million yuan. This year's turnover was 730 million yuan. According to the tax, the business tax was 5%, the urban construction tax was 7%, which was 12%, plus the tax of 20%. Although there was a reduction, 30% of the total would be tax. 730 million yuan meant 219 million yuan. This would save him a lot of money. Why did Zhang Hai still look reluctant? It was more than 30 million yuan in US dollars. In fact, he didn't know whether the money could be saved or not. Zhang Hai didn't intend to ask for it. It had nothing to do with him. Third, if the cheese restaurant and you have any projects in China in the future, we will give you the green light. Seeing that Zhang Hai was not tempted by the first two conditions, he said the third one. But the third condition made Zhang Hai speechless. His focus was mainly in Boston. What did the projects in China have to do with him? He didn't intend to invest his funds in China. After all, he had seen too many cases where money was wasted. If he put his money in the bank, he could live on the interest. If he put his money in China, what if he was targeted by the second generation? Who would he turn to for help? To be honest, I'm not interested in what you said. Looking at the middle-aged man in front of him, Zhang Hai waved his hand, indicating that he should stop talking for the time being. To put it bluntly, these three conditions had nothing to do with Zhang Hai. Then what does Brother Zhang mean? If there's anything you want, I'll pass it on to my boss. Hearing that Zhang Hai was not satisfied with these things, the middle-aged man in front of him couldn't help but be a little surprised. Was Zhang Hai going to ask for an exorbitant price? He had already said just now that this was the help and compensation from the imperial court. If Zhang Hai dares to ask for an exorbitant price, wouldn't he be afraid of losing his life to spend it? But now, no matter what, Zhang Hai had the initiative, so he also wanted to hear what Zhang Hai wanted. What I want is quite simple. First, I want our country's tour group to open an extra route to our town. Looking at the middle-aged man in front of him, Zhang Hai made his first request. But when he heard Zhang Hai's words, the middle-aged man was stunned. What's the situation? Open a tour route? What kind of condition is this? Not to mention people at his level, even some cadres at the prefecture level, city level, as long as they are in charge of tourism, report to the higher-ups and ask for an extra tour route, and the higher-ups will approve it. Is there a need to trouble himself with this matter? It's like a person inviting another person to a meal. After arriving at a 5-star hotel, the other person said that a steamed bun and a glass of water would be enough. This made the person who invited the other person a little overwhelmed. Can't I? Seeing his appearance, Zhang Hai hesitated and asked. Logically speaking, he also knew that this matter shouldn't be difficult, but he must ask these people for help anyway because he wants to mess with the Yin family. But if he can solve the problem of Winthrop's tour route, it will be a good thing for Zhang Hai. Of course, there's no problem. What other requirements do you have? Just say it. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, the man immediately nodded and said, logically speaking, in a negotiation, even if it's easy to do, he will hesitate. Obviously, it's not so easy to do. However, the middle-aged man didn't play any tricks on this matter. Although Zhang Hai didn't understand it now, it didn't mean that he wouldn't understand it in the future. If Zhang Hai knew that this matter wasn't so difficult to deal with after he left, it would be troublesome. The second thing is that I want to introduce some domestic animals. Seeing the middle-aged man agree to his first condition so readily, Zhang Hai was a little confused. Although he knows that this matter is not difficult, it's not too simple, right? When he was in Winthrop, Mayor Wallace almost went crazy because of the problem of tourists. Now, he is still asking the Massachusetts government to increase the tour route. How can this matter be solved so easily when he is back in China? No problem, except for pandas, golden monkeys, and other species unique to our country. Everything else is fine, even Siberian tigers and so on. As for plants, except for the mother plant of Dahongpo, everything else is fine, but the premise is that the United States has to accept it. Seeing Zhang Hai put forward the second condition, the man agreed without hesitation. This is also a very simple request. Even some of the forestry department directors of prefecture-level cities can make this decision, let alone people at their level. Listening to the other party agree to 2 consecutive requests, Zhang Hai was also a little confused. It seems that he thought too much at the beginning. Indeed, the country does not allow some locally preserved species to be brought out. But that is just a general request. If they really want to bring them out, it is not impossible. After all, some of the domestic plant and animal species have no advantage compared to foreign species. For example, the Ujimikan sheep that Zhang Hai had once eaten, which he had wholeheartedly wanted to bring abroad, was compared to the boar goat. Although its meat is more compact and delicious, the amount of meat produced is far less, and the scale can't be expanded because it is more aggressive. Coupled with the geographical conditions of breeding, it is destined that it is impossible to breed them on a large scale abroad. The reason why it is not allowed is to maintain the local livestock industry and maintain stability. If Zhang Hai wants to bring some out to raise, it doesn't matter, let alone people at their level. Except for national treasures that are not allowed, they think that everything else is fine. Using some animals in exchange for Zhang Hai's friendship is too worth it. Hearing the middle-aged man agree to his second condition so readily, Zhang Hai can't help but be a little speechless. In fact, before he mentioned it, he only had these 2 conditions. The first condition is to let him have a lot of money, and the second condition is to let him fill his stomach, especially after Xueqi moved into his manor recently. His love for food is getting stronger and stronger, but if he always eats Western food, there will be a time when he is tired of it. Chinese food is better. However, the seasoning for Chinese food is not ordinary. Now that he has the green light, he can make whatever he wants. Third, if something happens to me in the country, the imperial court has to come forward to help me settle it. However, Zhang Hai thought about it. Since the first two conditions are so easy, plus the in-families matter, Zhang Hai decided to add a protective talisman for himself. No problem. Hearing Zhang Hai's third condition, although he didn't know why Zhang Hai added this third condition, the other party still nodded. As long as Zhang Hai doesn't seek death, then they can protect Zhang Hai. It doesn't matter. These three conditions, in addition to the three conditions from the beginning, are all of my conditions. Looking at the middle-aged man in front of him, Zhang Hai always felt that as long as he has these three conditions, it would be a bit of a loss, so he still said to him, "Okay." In fact, in this middle-aged man's view, among the three conditions of Zhang Hai, the first and second are nonsense. There is no need for him. The young man beside him can say anything. The only condition added is Zhang Hai's third condition. He doesn't even need to ask for permission from his superior. He can make the decision on the spot. In his view, Zhang Hai is still very patriotic. Originally, he thought that Zhang Hai would ask for a lot, but he didn't expect Zhang Hai to give such three conditions. This made him feel a little emotional. It seems that the imperial court's patriotism education is still very good. Of course, Zhang Hai didn't know what he was thinking. In Zhang Hai's view, he got what he wanted. Winthrop opened a tourism route, so he has more money to earn. One must know that the villa area, shooting range, and commercial street are all his territory. Introducing domestic animals and plants makes him even more happy. In the future, if he wants to drink good tea and eat good food, he doesn't need to look at old Master Zhang's face, because he can also do it. The third condition is to protect himself under the condition that he doesn't betray the imperial court. This is very important. After the 6 conditions were finished, the two also signed a simple written contract. Of course, it can't be seen in public. If either party expose this agreement, the agreement will be void, but it is useful to find it in private. Chapter 428. The plan can start. Looking at Qi Li in front of him, Zhang Hai said faintly. After contacting the imperial court people, the imperial court people left first, but before leaving, he gave Zhang Hai his business card. With this, it meant that if Zhang Hai had anything, he could look for him at any time. As for the agreement, the two of them left with 1 copy each. Shortly after the middle-aged man left, Qi Li and her assistant came over. Everyone had lunch together in the hotel's restaurant, and Zhang Hai said faintly to Qi Li at the dinner table, "Have you finished negotiating?" Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Qi Li couldn't help but raise her head and look at him with surprise. "Yes, it's been negotiated. The day after tomorrow is the day of Du Feimin's banquet. Big and small people in the capital will definitely go, but the possibility of you being invited is not very high. If the in-family is invited, then you don't have to care about them. If they are not invited, you can go and leak some information to them." Hearing Qi Li's words, Zhang Hai nodded. "This time we must deal with them." Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Qi Li's eyes were also shining. Indeed, when Du Feimin held a banquet, it was inevitable that the influential people in the capital would go. After all, this was the royal family of the Middle East, the local tycoons of the Middle East. If they could make friends with such people, it would definitely be beneficial for them. Even if they couldn't make much money from them, they could also use the name of the local tycoons of the Middle East to do well in the country. However, these influential people naturally referred to the government, the imperial court, and some super-rich people. For Qi Li and the others, third-rate businessmen with family assets of less than 18 billion yuan, it was not so easy to get into this circle. For businessmen, what was the most important thing? Money. Well, yes, money was the most important thing. In addition to money, the most important thing was connections. If the in-family got wind of such an opportunity, it was impossible for them not to come. This was also Zhang Hai's bait to catch them, and it was a bait that they had no choice but to bite. "Then I'll go and arrange it. What are you going to do in the afternoon? Do you need me to leave her behind to be your guide?" Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Qi Li nodded to show that she understood. At the same time, she turned on her phone and prepared to fish. But halfway through, she suddenly remembered that Zhang Hai didn't have anything to do. If Delina and the others came to play, Zhang Hai would definitely take them out to play. However, Jiang Hai wasn't very familiar with the imperial capital. Should she arrange a tour guide for him? No need. Shaking his head, Jiang Hai directly rejected Qi Li's kindness. He didn't like this assistant. Oh! Hearing Jiang Hai's rejection, Qi Li was stunned for a moment, then responded softly. It seems that her relationship with Jiang Hai is still very stiff. After that, she didn't speak, lowered her head, and played with her phone. By the way, your restaurants don't have to pay taxes in the future. You don't have to pay customs taxes anymore. This is also one of the deals I made with them. Just when the atmosphere in the private room was a little cold, Jiang Hai said indifferently. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Qi Li raised her head in surprise and looked at Jiang Hai. She really didn't expect that Jiang Hai would help her save hundreds of millions in taxes so easily. No, it was more than hundreds of millions. Jiang Hai didn't mention the number of years. Doesn't that mean that as long as my restaurants are open, I don't have to pay taxes? That's not just hundreds of millions, it might be billions, or even tens of billions. Thinking of this, Qi Li's eyes began to shine. She really didn't think that Jiang Hai would give her such a big gift. Of course, she also knew that she wouldn't take all this money for herself. She would definitely take out Jiang Hai's share. Okay, we're done eating. You can go do your work. I want to go out and play. Looking at Qi Li's shining eyes in front of him, Jiang Hai couldn't help but feel a headache. This money grubber is really too much. I hope she doesn't misunderstand anything. Jiang Hai originally agreed based on the principle of not taking advantage of a bastard. Now it seems that Qi Li is thinking too much. Okay, I understand. I'll call Feng Yunchen and AI Xiaoxi to come and accompany you. After all, you're not very familiar with the capital. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Qi Li also stood up and wanted to walk out with a smile on her face. But before she walked out, she stopped and looked at Jiang Hai with a serious face and asked. Hearing her words, not only Jiang Hai, but also Daliana, Marian, and Lily were stunned. Azalina and Penelope were not familiar with Feng Yunchen and AI Xiaoxi. Penelope had never seen them before. Although Azalina had seen them before, she only glanced at them in a hurry. After all, she was a prisoner at that time. She only knew that there were two Huaxia women around Jiang Hai, but other people knew what these two women were up to. Especially Qi Li's assistant. When did her master become so easy to talk to? She even took the initiative to send them to Jiang Hai's side? Forget about them. Before the matter is completed, it's better not to tell them about my news. Otherwise, if something happens, it will be difficult for them. But when he heard Qi Li's words, Jiang Hai shook his head. If he waited until the infamily was solved, Jiang Hai estimated that there was a 90% chance that he would look for them. After all, they are his first and second women who have confirmed their relationship. They are much more important than Qi Li. Oh, then I understand. Hearing that Jiang Hai didn't intend to look for Feng Yunchen and AI Xiaoxi, although his original intention was to protect them, as long as Jiang Hai didn't look for them, Qi Li's heart was very happy. After everything was arranged, Qi Li left first. She was going to prepare for fishing. As for Jiang Hai, he took Delina, Marian, Azalina, and Penelope together. They sat in the car arranged by the hotel and began to play in the imperial capital. The imperial capital, one of the 4 ancient capitals of Huaxia, has the most world cultural heritage in the world. The history of the city's founding in 3060 gave birth to a large number of scenic spots and historical sites. But speaking of the official history of the imperial capital, it was mainly the Ming and Qing dynasties. Before that, Liao, Jin and Yuan were all hostile countries of the Song dynasty in the history of Huaxia. They were not recorded in the history books and were not familiar to everyone. The people who were really familiar with the imperial capital were the Ming and Qing dynasties. However, even in the Ming dynasty, the place where the capital was set at the beginning was not the imperial capital, but the southern capital. Later, the king of Yan, Zhu Di, rebelled. He was afraid that he could not control the local people, so he moved the capital back to the imperial capital. Later, the Manchurian Qing entered the pass and established the Qing dynasty. This was another story. After the overthrow of the Qing dynasty, the place where the previous dynasty was located was actually the southern capital, not the imperial capital. The reason why the imperial capital where the current imperial court was located was mainly because when Emperor Taizu first established the country, he did not have any big cities in his hands. Before the establishment of the country, The original city that was set as the capital was Bingqing. However, because Bingqing was too cold and too close to the border, there was no strategic buffer zone. Moreover, before the establishment of the country, they had conquered the imperial capital, so they decided to set the imperial capital in the imperial capital. However, these had nothing to do with Zhang Hai. He just came here to play. He had to admit that there were still many places to play in the imperial capital, such as the Forbidden City, the Great Wall, and the Summer Palace. In Zhang Hai's view, other than these three places, there were no other places to play. Tianan, Imperial Ancestral Temple. These places were connected to the Forbidden City. Tianan was the entrance of the Forbidden City, so they would visit it together. The Great Wall was outside the imperial capital, and the Summer Palace and the Old Summer Palace were together. So, the main places to play in the imperial capital were these three places. Of course, if they wanted to, they could visit the Bird's Nest. After all, that was the place where the Olympic Games were held. The Bird's Nest, the Water Cube, and the National Stadium were together. However, they needed tickets to enter. Zhang Hai did not like it very much. This afternoon, they were going to visit the Forbidden City. The last time Zhang Hai came to the imperial capital, he had visited the Forbidden City before. To be honest, the Forbidden City was much smaller than he had imagined. In the past, when he watched TV, he always felt that the Forbidden City was huge. It was the place where the emperor lived. However, after he really went there, he realized that the Forbidden City was actually not that big. Including the garden at the back, if he walked fast, he could finish looking at it in half an hour. If he looked at everything, it would be more than an hour. Of course, if he was tired and wanted to rest, it would be different. Of course, even if it was not big in Zhang Hai's eyes, the Forbidden City was still the top of the 5 biggest palaces in the world. The Versailles Palace in France, the Buckingham Palace in the United Kingdom, the Kremlin Palace in Russia, and the White House in the United States were all ranked below the Forbidden City. In Zhang Hai's eyes, these things might be boring. But in the eyes of pure Americans like Delina and the others, the Forbidden City was very magical. Even Alina and Penelope were surprised when they walked in. They kept talking about how majestic and magnificent it was. It seemed that the Forbidden City was still very beautiful to foreigners. The group of 5 walked and stopped. Occasionally, they would look at the souvenir stall at the side. They had a lot of fun. On the other side, Xueqi deliberately went to a department store of her company. As mentioned before, the Qi group was now mainly in the real estate business. Of course, they were not developers. They didn't have so much money and connections. Their so-called real estate business was to buy some stores and rent them out. Of course, if they just borrowed chickens to lay eggs, they wouldn't make much money. Therefore, they also had a department store. Although it only had 7 floors, it couldn't even be ranked in the top 20 in the imperial capital. However, the interior was still considered complete, and it was considered the largest department store in the vicinity. Of course, they didn't run these stores. These stores were all rented out. They only relied on the rent to maintain the water, electricity, security, and so on. Today, Xueqi's target was this department store. Because she knew that the person in charge of this department store was related to the Yin family. Chapter 429. The Qi family's department store was quite good, although it couldn't be compared with those luxury goods distribution centers. However, in this area, at least within the 3 bus stops on the left, right, front and back, it was still second to none. The number of customers here every day was not small. Of course, these customers didn't pay the department store for their purchases. The department store mainly relied on rent to make a living, and this was also an important source of income for the Qi family. In this department store, the first floor sold gold and valuable items, such as watches, mobile phones, and so on. There was also a small fruit experience store here. The first floor of the basement was a huge supermarket, and the second and third floors were the parking lot. The second floor sold some first-tier luxury goods, such as donkeys, crying, horse poop, and so on. Of course, brands like Patek Philippe were not here. The third floor sold some second-tier brands of clothing, bags, and so on, mainly some Korean brands, and some less famous brands in Europe and the United States. On the second floor, the cheapest clothes were thousands of yuan each. The average price of the clothes here was hundreds of yuan for the cheap ones, and tens of thousands for the good ones. The fourth floor sold some sports equipment, such as treadmills, dumbbells, and so on. Of course, it also sold sports brand clothing, such as Nike, Ada, and so on. They were all sold here, and the things here were the cheapest among the clothes. The fifth floor was the dining area. There were many restaurants here. There were Chinese, Western, fast food, and all kinds of restaurants. Not only did they have to take care of the foreign customers, but the people who opened shops here would also eat here. The sixth floor was a huge indoor game hall. It was similar to the game halls where Zhang Hai and the others played the King of Fighters and the War of the Three Kingdoms when they were young. But now it was bigger. Naturally, there were also arcade games, but they were more like claw machines, fishing, turntables, guessing right, fruit machines, and so on. As for the game machines, the most popular ones were driving, riding motorcycles, horse racing, and shooting. It was like the oldest game machines. Although there were still some, there were not many people playing it. On the seventh floor was a movie theater. In Huaxia, there was not only one movie theater, but many others. There was one upstairs in the Qi family. It was also a favorite place for young couples to hang out. It was cheaper than Wanda, and the environment was similar. Therefore, the attendance rate here was not low. As for the building security and management personnel's offices, they were on the other side of the partition between the 6th and 7th floors. Although the Qi group was a company controlled by the family, other than the Qi family who had a lot of shares, other people also had a lot of shares. In the company, besides Qi Li's family, the person who owned the second most stocks was none other than Qi Song, Qi Li's eldest uncle, whom Zhang Hai had met before. This time, Qi Li was going to find Qi Song's son, her cousin, Qi Liangkai. Don't forget that this guy was very close to Zhangwu. Last time when they had a face-to-face confrontation, Qi Li directly kicked him out of the Qi group. Although he no longer held a position in the Qi group, he became the general manager of this department store. Although he had no right to speak in the head office, he seemed to have more power. Qi Li came to him just to let him tell Zhangwu the news. He believed that the fish would be hooked. Therefore, when Qi Li walked into this department store, he already knew the news of Qi Li's arrival. As for Qi Li, it was impossible for Qi Liangkai not to hate her, just like how Qi Song hated Qi Li's father. It was Qi Liangkai who brought Qi Liangkai up, but now Qi Liangkai was riding on his head. As for Qi Liangkai, he had always regarded himself as the eldest son of the Qi family. When Qi Li's father died, he should be the one who inherited the company. How could a woman come over and take away the company that should have belonged to him? He refused to accept it and was not happy, so he colluded with Zhangwu later. Now that Qi Li came here, he was a little surprised. According to his subordinates, Qi Li went straight to the area on the second floor and began to pick up evening gowns, which made him even more confused. With doubts in his heart, he couldn't help walking out of his office and taking the elevator to the second floor. He wanted to see what Qi Li was going to do. When he walked over, he realized that there were quite a few people gathered outside the shop. There were shop assistants nearby, as well as people who were shopping. Regardless of whether they were men or women, they were all looking into the shop from time to time. Their eyes were filled with admiration, envy, and jealousy. When he walked in, he couldn't help but feel his eyes lit up. At this time, he saw Qi Li standing in the middle of the store. However, at this time, she finally changed out of her unchanged women's suit. At this time, she was wearing a beige tulle top and a long black skirt with a long slit. The simple black and white colors made her look very noble. If she was a queen in the past, she was now an empress. Her tall figure and black skirt swayed from time to time, revealing her slender and long white legs under the skirt. Just her legs alone were estimated to be enough for people to play with for a few years. Her upper body was full, and the clothes were gently stretched out. Through the gap in the middle of the shirt, one could see a rift valley. Although it was not particularly grand, it was definitely not small. It was just right. In addition, her hair was tied up at the back of her head. Although the clothes on her body were simple, they were large and shining brightly. Coupled with an expensive handbag, when she stood there, she really attracted everyone's attention. Looking at Qi Li in front of him, a trace of greed flashed in Qi Liangcai's eyes. Such a beautiful woman, such a noble woman, if he could have her, it would be cool just thinking about it. However, he knew that it was impossible. Because they were cousins. However, if they worked well in the future, it was not completely impossible. But now, he had to suppress this desire. Taking a deep breath, Qi Liangcai put on a smile on his face and walked over. Shaoli, How do you have time to shop here? Haven't you been watching your restaurant recently? Looking at Xueqi said with a smile. Hearing his words, the security guards and the staff who were originally watching quietly dispersed. Of course, the customers did not bother him. They continued to stand there and look at Xueqi's figure. She was really too beautiful. Yes, I don't have much time, but Xueqi is back. No matter how busy I am, I have to dress up well. Looking at herself in the mirror, Xueqi couldn't help but chuckle. However, her words were still cold and arrogant as she said to Xueqi. Xueqi is back? Why did he come back? Hearing Xueqi's words, Xueqi narrowed his eyes. He did not have a good impression of Xueqi. It's none of your business. Help me check it out. How about it? Why don't I wear this? After saying coldly to Xueqi, Xueqi looked at the assistant beside her and asked her. At the same time, she kept turning in circles smugly. No one else can wear this. Really? Boss, if you wear this, you must let those people know that you are the most beautiful. Whether it is the Middle East nouveau riche or the top businessman, they will all bow down to you. At that time, let's see how Xueqi dares to go out and flirt with other women. Hearing Xueqi's words, the assistant also said with a smile. Hearing her words, Xueqi smiled softly and then turned in front of the mirror proudly. As for Xueqi, who was standing behind them, after hearing the assistant's words, his eyelids twitched unconsciously. The Middle East nouveau riche, the top businessman? These two words were too sensitive for him, but he would not ask Xueqi, because he knew that she would not tell him even if he asked. So he just watched Xueqi finish her smugness and change her clothes. She was so satisfied with this suit that she naturally bought it. After watching Xueqi leave happily, Xueqi also made a phone call. The person on the other end of the phone was Zhangwu. After Zhangwu heard Xueqi's words, he could not help but frown. Obviously, he was also very sensitive to these two titles. He asked his brother to check it and got a message. 2 days later, Dufayman Viha Muhammad bin Rashid Al Maktoum of the royal family of Dubai in the Middle East was going to hold a banquet in the capital. Only the officials in the capital or the top businessmen were invited. In other words, only the influential people in the capital were qualified to attend this banquet. Originally, the Qi family and the An family were not qualified to attend this banquet. However, for some reason, Xueqi's husband, Xueqi, seemed to have some friendship with this royal family member, so he was also invited to attend this banquet. After hearing this news, the 3 members of the An family were about to go crazy. Now, the An family had been suppressed by the Qi family. If they did not have better connections than the Qi family, they might not be able to hold on. As a result, if Xueqi and Xueqi really attended this banquet, they would be able to get to know some dignitaries and top businessmen. As long as they put in more effort, the An family would be doomed. The An family might really be finished. The most painful thing was to lose something they had gained before. The 3 of them discussed for a while. It was impossible for them to stop Xueqi and Xueqi from attending, so the only way was for them to attend as well. At the very least, they had to know whether Xueqi and Xueqi would harm them if they attended. How could they harm them? They had to know if they were going to die, but it was not easy for them to attend the banquet with their status. Fortunately, there were still 2 days before the banquet started, which was enough time for them to shamelessly ask people to take them in. They no longer considered going in as the guest of honor, but they would also be honored to go in as the attendants. Now that their family had reached the point of life and death, they did not care about their reputation anymore. This was human nature. If Xueqi really put this opportunity in front of them, they would think whether it was a trap or a trap. However, if it was an opportunity that they begged for, they would definitely not let it go, even if it was bait. Chapter 430. How is it? Looking at the shocked Xueqi in front of her, Xueqi smiled and turned around, then proudly pointed her finger at Xueqi, and deliberately tilted her head, revealing her slender neck. What are you doing? Looking at Xueqi's appearance, to be honest, Xueqi was a bit surprised, because Xueqi was really beautiful at this time. Xueqi's appearance was not bad. She was more than 170 meters tall, wearing a beige gauze coat and a black gauze long skirt. Slightly swaying, the slender asterisk under the long skirt could be seen. Coupled with the jewelry on her body, it was really sparkling. Her originally black long hair was made light brown by her. Obviously, She found a hairstylist to do it. Her long hair was neatly tied behind her head, and she didn't have any bangs, but she deliberately left 2 curly hair hanging on both sides of her cheeks. Coupled with the fruit-colored makeup, it made her look noble and elegant. Most importantly, she was really beautiful. Even Jiang Hai felt his heart beat faster after looking at her. However, as she made this 213 pose, Jiang Hai was a bit confused. What the hell is this? Isn't this the pose of a woman in a cartoon you liked to watch before? No matter what I did before, please forgive me, because this concubine is really beautiful. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Qili raised her head again. Psycho! Hearing her words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but wave his hand. He naturally knew who this guy was imitating, the world's #1 beauty in One Piece, Snake Princess Boa, Hancock. Although the 2D and 3D worlds are different, Qili did have the ability to cosplay, but Jiang Hai didn't buy it. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Qili was speechless and curled her lips. She stood up again and looked at Jiang Hai with a smile. In the past, she didn't watch cartoons, and the reason why she knew this was because Jiang Hai said a long time ago that he liked to watch cartoons. In the past, Jiang Hai was really a cartoon fan. Although he hated the island country, he liked the cartoons there very much. In addition to the literary and artistic love-action idol dramas and the animated version of the literary and artistic love-action idol dramas, he also likes to watch serious cartoons, especially the 3 hot-blooded migrant worker cartoons. He has always liked them, but recently, his favorite is One Punch Man. Well, it's almost time, let's go. Looking at Qili in front of him, Jiang Hai stood up and walked out of the door. But just as he left, he was stopped by Qili. She curiously looked at Jiang Hai. You're going to wear this? Looking at Jiang Hai, Qili asked in disbelief. What's wrong with my clothes? Archaeopteryx, the most awesome and shiny outdoor sportswear. This is not cheaper than yours. Hearing Qili's words, Jiang Hai took a look at his clothes. It was a specially custom-made coat, waterproof, dirt-proof, has many pockets, and the short-sleeve shirt inside is also waterproof, dissipating, sweat-absorbent, and most importantly, it won't be scratched. The style of pants and shoes is the same as above. This is indeed not cheap, but it's going to a banquet. We're going to a banquet. This has nothing to do with cheap or expensive. Do you want to get a set of, formal clothes? Looking at Jiang Hai, Qili couldn't help but say with some hesitation. If Jiang Hai goes like this, now that she thinks about it, it's really a bit embarrassing. It's okay, let's go. But hearing her words, Jiang Hai smiled and walked straight out of the hotel. But as soon as he walked out, he saw Qili's Rolls-Royce, which is exactly the same as his, parked at the entrance of the hotel. Looking at this car, Jiang Hai didn't get in. Qili, who followed from behind, saw Jiang Hai stop and couldn't help but be stunned. She stood quietly beside Jiang Hai and looked at him strangely. Why didn't he get in the car? This car is not good. Let's change to another one. Shaking his head, Jiang Hai said to Qili. This car is not good? Then there doesn't seem to be a better car. When Jiang Hai bought this car in the United States, it was about 3 million RMB, but it was sold for 8 million RMB in China. This is indeed the best RV, and the best is the limited edition. The only thing more expensive than this car is the supercar. Isn't it too crazy to drive such a car? No, it's not that this car is not good enough, but this car is too good. You will understand when you get there. Shaking his head, Jiang Hai said to Qili. Indeed, Qili has attended many banquets. She knows more than him, but today she has to listen to him. Then, well, I still have a BMW 7 Series. I will ask them to drive it over. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Qili hesitated, but decided to listen to him. Since Jiang Hai wants to be low-key, then drive a BMW 7 Series. No, it's even worse. About 300,000 RMB. How about a Cadillac? Do you have it? Hearing the words BMW 7 Series, Jiang Hai shook his head. These cars are not good either. After thinking for a while, Jiang Hai told Qili a brand. For Jiang Hai, Cadillac is indeed a medium-sized brand in the United States. It is not too expensive. But in China, an imported Cadillac is worth more than 1 million RMB. But Jiang Hai said that it is only about 300,000 RMB. After thinking for a while, Qili called her company. To be honest, Xueqi really doesn't know about Cadillac. She must have seen this brand before, but she has never sat in it, nor driven it. When she was young, her father drove a Jetta. Later, when she went to college, he changed to a Mercedes-Benz. After she graduated from college, he changed to a Bentley. Her first car in life is the BMW 7 Series that she just mentioned. In China, the Cadillac brand is actually a little awkward. Imported cars cost more than 1 million RMB, and domestic cars cost between 300,000 RMB to 500,000 RMB. But most of the people who bought a car with 300,000 RMB will buy a Japanese car, because it is more cost-effective, faster, and more importantly, it is more fuel-efficient. And the people who bought a car with 500,000 RMB will buy a small Mercedes-Benz or a small BMW. In China, Mercedes-Benz and BMW have always been popular brands. Even if it is not an S-Series, a Mercedes-Benz looks much better than a Cadillac, so Xueqi really can't get a car like that in a short period of time. She can only call her company and ask if anyone in the company has a car like that. Unexpectedly, she really found a car after she called back. It is driven by a junior manager in the Qi group. After getting the news, Xueqi immediately called him. It could be imagined that when the person received the call, he was extremely shocked and immediately drove over. Thinking about it, she is very excited. The chairman of the Qi group wants to meet her in front of a hotel. What does he mean? Is he interested in me? Even if he is not interested in me, does he want me to accompany him for a drink? Based on the principle of collecting money based on color and collecting money based on color, this guy really ran very fast. In less than 15 minutes, a brand new Cadillac stopped in front of the hotel. But when he saw Xueqi and Jiang Hai standing together, he is a little confused. Does President Qi like to have two people together? Obviously, he is thinking too much. Xueqi just asked for the keys and left directly without even waving. Just like that, the junior manager stood there and watched Jiang Hai and Xueqi get into his newly bought car and drive away. And he stands alone in the wind, speechless as the lights of his car gradually disappear. What is this? Looking at the keys in his hand, the junior manager is speechless. He originally thought that it was a gift from 1,000 miles away, but when he arrived, he realized that the other party was just borrowing the car, and the car was the one that he had just bought. Most importantly, this person was his boss. He did not even have the spirit to resist. In the end, he could only helplessly take a taxi home. Jiang Hai and Xueqi drove together to the location of the cocktail party. Behind them, a taxi followed them. However, the person in the taxi was not the taxi driver, but Azalina in disguise. Jiang Hai and the others did not forget what their goal was today. The place where Du Feynman held the banquet was in a villa on the outskirts of the imperial city. Of course, the vicinity of this villa had long been cordoned off. These days, Du Feynman had been staying here. For someone of his status, it was indeed inappropriate for him to stay in a hotel, even if it was a high-class hotel. If anything were to happen to him, it would be unacceptable for the imperial court. Everyone knew that the current imperial court was lacking oil. Huaxia had always said that it had vast territory and abundant resources since ancient times. But in fact, the older people understood that this meant that perhaps in the era of cold weapons, Huaxia's territory and population were the guarantee of hegemony. However, in the era of hot weapons, Huaxia could not do it because of the lack of strategic resources. Oil was pitifully little. Strategic minerals such as copper were also pitifully little in this era where steel was the bone and oil was the blood. Huaxia's resources really had nothing to do with vast territory and abundant resources. For the sake of oil, Huaxia valued Du Feynman more than the average country's leaders. This villa was specially rented for Du Feynman. Naturally, the vicinity was also the focus of the defense of the sea, land and air forces. When Jiang Hai's car arrived here, there was a special gate to check if there were any dangerous items in the car. Even the large wrench prepared in the trunk was taken out. No weapons were allowed to be in the car. After the check, Jiang Hai and Xueqi also drove inside. As soon as they arrived at the parking lot, Xueqi could not help but be stunned. Because in her opinion, for such a high-end cocktail party, the guests would naturally drive good cars. Not to mention the cocktail parties of the Middle East tycoons that she had heard of before. Just for the cocktail parties of people like her, the parking lot outside was filled with Rolls-Royces. Bentleys were even worse than dogs, and they didn't even dare to open their mouths when driving a broken Mercedes. But what was going on now? Chapter 431. Oh my God, why are all these cars? Xueqi couldn't believe her eyes as she pointed at the parking lot outside. If she didn't know beforehand that this was a top-class cocktail party, she would have thought that this was a birthday party of a township enterprise. Because at this time, there were almost no cars worth more than 500,000 in the parking lot. Looking around, almost 70% of the cars were Audi A6s. All of them were 18 models. And there wasn't even a 2.0 model. Almost all of them were of the same model. The cheapest car was 410,000, and the most expensive one was 460,000. Other than that, most of the cars were Japanese cars, including Zhonghai's Cadillac, some other American cars, and some domestic cars, such as Volvo and Infiniti. There wasn't a single SUV or Jeep, and there weren't any bad cars. There weren't any cars worth more than 100,000. Basically, all the cars were worth between 200,000 and 400,000. The cars parked here were indeed the same as the cars parked at the entrance of a township's richest man's birthday party. Seeing this, Xueqi was a little confused. What was going on? She didn't believe that the owners of these cars were poor. But what the hell were they doing driving these cars? Could it be that the Middle Eastern nouveau riche didn't like other people driving luxury cars? Seeing her puzzled expression, Zhonghai smiled. He actually didn't know either. This was what Du Feimin told him when he called. The reason why he drove these cars was naturally not because Du Feimin didn't like them. It was because the main guests of this cocktail party were different. As mentioned earlier, the people invited by Du Feimin this time were mostly people in the political circle and influential officials in the capital. Other than that, it was important to note that these were the top businessmen. These officials were the main guests. As for the businessmen, they were just accompanying. Under the background of the imperial court, why would the officials drive cars? If the cars were too shabby, people would say that they were fake. If the cars were too good, people would report and investigate them. Therefore, cars worth 300,000 to 500,000 were the most important. And the main source of these cars was the official cars. Of course, the investigation of private use of government vehicles was very strict now. However, if a government vehicle broke down after a year and needed to be replaced, then the broken vehicle would naturally be disposed of very cheaply to the original leader of the unit. This was also a hidden rule. The imperial court also turned a blind eye to it. As long as it was not too ruthless, no one would care. After all, this money was really not much to these high-ranking officials. It was precisely because these people were the main characters that the cars they drove were all of this level. When those businessmen came over, they would drive cars worth 8 million or 10 million. Yes, they knew that they were rich. Why were they showing off here? Whose face are you slapping? Do you still want to do business after you leave this place? You're so arrogant. I'll teach you a lesson. Therefore, all businessmen would be very sensible in such situations. Their cars couldn't be too good, but they couldn't be too bad either. If it was too bad, these officials would recognize them. Wouldn't that be a loss of face? Therefore, he could only be on par with the officials. This was also something that was tacitly agreed upon. Xueqi had never attended such a high-class event before, so it was natural that she didn't know about it. Under the guidance of the security guard, Zhonghai drove to the spot that was prepared for him in the parking lot. Du Feimin was obviously very interested in Zhonghai, because he knew very well that Zhonghai still had $400 million of oil futures in his hands. Therefore, he didn't treat Zhonghai lightly at all. The car was parked in the middle of the second row of the parking lot. When the car was parked, two Ford Taurus slowly drove in from a distance, but their positions were much further away, almost at the back. When the two cars were parked, a man in his 30s got out of the first car with his female companion. 3 men got out of the second car. Zhonghai was very familiar with them, and Xueqi was even more familiar with them. They were the 3 from the Yin family. When the 3 of them got out of the car, they made eye contact with Zhonghai. Zhonghai clenched his fists in an instant, and his body unconsciously emitted a murderous aura, but Xueqi suppressed it. Now is not the time. Hearing Xueqi's words, Zhonghai took a deep breath. He knew that Azalina would help him solve this problem. Then, without saying anything else, he directly led Xueqi into the villa in front of him. As for the 3 Yin family members in the distance, when they saw Zhonghai and Xueqi, their killing intent became even stronger. Especially when they saw that Zhonghai's car was parked in the second row, they really hated him to the point that the roots of their teeth itched. They really didn't expect that Jiang Hai would actually climb up the social ladder. Let's go. Don't talk nonsense after you go in. If it weren't for our family owing you a favor, would you still want to come in? Just as the three from the Yin family were glaring at Jiang Hai, the man in front of them said faintly. Then, he looked at the three from the Yin family with slight disgust and walked in with his female companion. Although the three of them felt their faces hurt, especially in Dushuan, they could only smile and nod in agreement. Then, they followed the man into the villa. Although the villa didn't look very big from the outside, after walking in, one would find that it was a different world inside. After passing the security check and walking through the door, what greeted Jiang Hai and Qi Li was a huge hall. This hall was about 5,000 square meters. In the middle was a long table with fruits and cold dishes. The four corners also had different kinds of food. One of the corners was a bar with 3 bartenders working hard to mix drinks. It was an excellent place to create an atmosphere. On the other side, there was a barbecue chef grilling skewers. Perhaps only the people from the new province knew how much the Arabians liked to eat barbecue. On the huge skewer, there were all kinds of barbecue skewers. Several Arabian chefs were working hard to grill the meat. Many young people gathered there. They were also very interested in the food. Then, in the other 2 corners, one was baking cakes and bread on the spot, and the other was making teppanyaki. It could be said that Du Feimin's banquet wasn't as simple as just drinking. He seemed to be very interested in eating. After Qi Li walked into the hall, she felt that her eyes weren't enough. This was because at this time, there were almost 100 people gathered in the hall. These people were both men and women. Some were gathered together, while others were looking for food. Among them, there were many people in their 40s and 50s. Qi Li felt that they were familiar, but she was very sure that she didn't know them. In her opinion, there was only one possibility, which was that she had seen them on TV before. In addition, there were some people that she had only heard of before. These people were the top tycoons in the capital's business circle. Although there weren't any particularly famous people on the surface, these people's personal wealth was definitely more than 20 billion yuan. Although it wasn't much more than Qi Li's family wealth, don't forget that Qi Li's wealth was in the family. The money mainly didn't belong to her, but to her mother and her 2 younger sisters. How much could her family wealth be? Moreover, 10 billion yuan was actually just a starting point in the circle of these tycoons. Only those with more than 1 million yuan were considered second class. Only those with more than 2 million yuan or even 30 billion yuan could touch the edge of the top circle. Usually, no matter if these people attended any cocktail party that Qi Li and the others could attend, they would definitely be the finale. But at this time they were just some small side characters, nothing more. Hey! Niece Qi, why are you here? Just when Qi Li felt that her eyes weren't enough, a slightly unexpected voice came from the side. Then, a middle-aged man who looked to be in his 50s or 60s with a balding head and a beer belly came over. There was a trace of surprise and doubt in his eyes. Hey! Uncle Zhou, you're here too. Let me introduce you. This is my husband, Jiang Hai. This is Uncle Zhou, Zhou Yu, who is now the director of the Ministry of Land and Resources. Looking at the middle-aged man, Qi Li smiled and immediately introduced him. At the same time, she hinted at Jiang Hai with her eyes. In fact, Jiang Hai had heard of this person before, but not from Qi Li, but from Qi Li's mother. This person should be the protector of the Qi family in the capital. This person was also from the military. He had once been saved by Qi Li's father. Later on, when he arrived at the capital, he sought refuge with him. That was how the Qi family became what it was today. After all, this person came from the army and was very loyal. If it wasn't for him, the Qi family might have been finished when Qi Li's father died. Later, it was said that he had always wanted his son to marry Qi Li, but with Jiang Hai, this matter was finally left unsettled. You're Mr. Zhou? Oh, hello, I've heard of you. Niece Qi is a good person. You must be good to her. Hearing Qi Li's words, Zhou Yu also smiled and took the initiative to stretch out his hand. After shaking hands with Jiang Hai, he said with a serious face. Sure. Hearing his words, what can Jiang Hai say? My marriage with Qi Li is just a fake one? Stop fooling around. At this time, he has to give some face to the other party. Although it is a little awkward, Jiang Hai can only say with a smile. Dad, you're here, hey? Xiao Li is also here. I originally wanted to call you and invite you to come together, but my dad said that he was afraid that you would be uncomfortable if you came, so I didn't call. This is... Just as the two shook hands, another voice came, and then a man who looked a little like Xueqi, but much younger, came over. This man was more than 1.8 meters tall and his body was very well proportioned. The most important thing was that his eyes were bright and his body looked very strong. He was wearing a formal suit and was holding 2 glasses of mixed wine in his hands. He was a sunny and handsome man. Along the way, he attracted a lot of attention, but when he saw Xueqi, his eyes began to shine. Chapter 432. This is my husband, Zhang Hai. This is Zhou Xian, Uncle Zhou Yu's son. Looking at the handsome young man walking over, Xueqi's face was slightly embarrassed. Speaking of which, Zhou Xian was quite good in this circle. Perhaps it was because his father was from the military, so he did not have the habit of spoiling his son. Since young, Zhou Xian did not have a bad reputation like those second generations. Instead, he had a good reputation. He had been good at his studies since elementary school. At the same time, he was not bad looking. He also had sports talents, basketball, and football. When he was in university, he even participated in Cuba and was the team's #1 scorer. However, when he got older, he did not go to the CBA to develop his career. There was nothing bad about his private life. He did not smoke, nor was he debauched. He also did not have any bad side effects. Now, he was working in the Ministry of Land. Although he was only a small staff member, with his father's connections, no one dared to look down on him or exclude him. When he had nothing to do, his hobby was to exercise. He ran every morning, ran at night, and played basketball in the afternoon after work. His life was very healthy. This was what Zhou Yu was most proud of in this circle. His son did not have to worry about anything. Xueqi and he met in high school. At that time, Xueqi's father was already relying on Zhou Yu. The relationship between the two families was quite good. From the first time he saw Xueqi, Zhou Xian liked Xueqi. However, Xueqi did not like such a hypocrite. After going to university, Xueqi went abroad and met in Chonggu. When she came back, Zhou Xian was very sad. However, with Zhou Yu's character, he would not do anything to steal his love. Therefore, he could not do anything when he saw his son in pain. Later, after the change in the Qi family, he thought it was an opportunity to let Xueqi marry his son. Unfortunately, Xueqi's mother would definitely not let her family's foundation be taken advantage of by others. This was because she knew that although Zhou Yu and Zhou Xian were good people, once she married into their family, Zhou Xian would have the final say. At that time, it would only be a matter of time before the Qi family changed its name to the Zhou family. That was why they chose Zhang Hai, who had no chance. Zhang Hai was a good person. He didn't have any power or background. Furthermore, he knew everything about him. He wasn't a bad person. Even if she could be used to shut the mouths of the Xueqi family members, she had no ambition. Even if she had a child with Xueqi in the future, even if the child's surname was Zhang, wouldn't it be up to them to educate the child? Zhang Hai was basically a bad guy. He didn't have any right to speak. It could be seen that the person who controlled Zhang Hai's fate was actually Xueqi's mother. One had to admit that the older, the wiser. Oh, hello. My name is Zhou Xian. I'm now working in the Ministry of Land and Resources. Hearing Xueqi's introduction, Zhou Xian's eyes couldn't help but stagnate. Then, he sized up Zhang Hai and reached out his hand confidently. In fact, he didn't think that there was anything to be unconfident about because he knew about Zhang Hai's situation in the past. He was a bachelor and didn't even have a job. He had to rely on Xueqi to live off her. Now, it seemed that other than being taller than him, he didn't seem to have any advantages. He wasn't as handsome as him, and his background was even worse. The most important thing was this guy's brain short-circuited? What the hell is he wearing on such an occasion? My name is Zhang Hai. I raise cattle. Looking at his appearance, Zhang Hai couldn't help but smile. Was he born to attract criticism? The moment the two shook hands, Zhang Hai felt that Zhou Xian was slowly increasing his strength. This made Zhang Hai a little speechless. In the past, he had only heard of such a melodramatic plot on TV or in novels. He didn't expect that he would actually encounter it. However, Jiang Hai wasn't a pushover. If you increase your strength, then I will also increase my strength. Twice the strength of the human limit. Was it something that two people who like to exercise could compare with? In an instant, Jiang Hai increased his strength, and this person's face turned purple. Cough, niece Qi. Let me introduce you to the people here. Since you are here, don't waste this opportunity. Seeing that his son had actually suffered a loss in the hands of Jiang Hai, Zhou Yu immediately said. People were biased. Although Zhou Yu was not a bad person, he definitely had to stand on his son's side. Originally, his son wanted to compare notes with Jiang Hai, so it was inconvenient for him to speak. However, his son was at a disadvantage, so he had to make a move. Hearing his words, Zhou Xian instantly withdrew his hand and then gently put it behind his back. If someone was behind him at this time, they would definitely see that there was an obvious purple circle on Zhou Xian's hand. This was caused by Jiang Hai's pinch. Looking at his appearance, Jiang Hai couldn't help but chuckle. Blindly showing off. Was his strength something that he could compare with? In fact, Jiang Hai had only used less than 30% of his strength to pinch like this. If Jiang Hai had used more strength, he would have crushed Zhou Xian's hand with 50% of his strength. Looking at Jiang Hai in front of him, Zhou Xian couldn't help but curse in his heart. He was really useless. An old cow raiser dared to come here and dared to be so arrogant. However, he had to admit that this cow raiser's strength was really great. Oh, Uncle Zhou, there's no need. I still have to accompany my husband. Hearing Zhou Yu's words, Qili also smiled and refused. Hearing what she said, Zhou Yu and Zhou Xian were a bit surprised. It had to be known that being able to sneak in was not an easy matter. Any one of the people inside would have to stomp their feet and walk around unsteadily on the outside. What did she say now? In order to accompany Jiang Hai, she didn't want to get to know the people here? Did this Qi Li become stupid after marriage? Xiao Li, you should go and get to know some people. This place is only so big. Brother Jiang Hai won't get lost, right? Seeing Qi Li's determined look, Zhou Xian shook his wrist and said with a serious face even though he had just suffered a loss. At the same time, he looked at Jiang Hai with a red gaze. What was a cow raiser doing here? Hey, Mr. Jiang, you're here. Why are you only here now? However, before he could finish speaking, he was interrupted by someone. Zhou Xian couldn't help but turn around to look at the source of the voice with some anger. In the end, he found that the person who interrupted him was about the same age as his father. At this time, he was running toward Jiang Hai with a smile. It was obvious that he attached great importance to Jiang Hai. Although Zhou Xian didn't know who this person was, Zhou Yu did. When he saw this person coming over, he subconsciously stood at attention. Oh, you just came over. Where's Du Feimin? Looking at this person, Jiang Hai also smiled. This person was no stranger to Jiang Hai because this person was the person in charge who had talked to him about persuading Du Feimin that day. Jiang Hai didn't know what this person's job was. Jiang Hai also didn't know what this person's position was. However, looking at Zhou Yu's appearance, it was clear that this person's rank was definitely not low. Seeing this person walk over quickly, Jiang Hai also smiled and greeted him. Mr. Macdam is in the room discussing with the representatives of the imperial court. When will you? This person looked at Jiang Hai and spoke very carefully. After all, the relationship between Jiang Hai and Du Feimin was one of their bargaining chips. Then let's talk about it later. I'm a little hungry. I'm going to get some food. Looking at the food around him, Jiang Hai smiled and took the initiative to speak. Hearing this person smiled and tactfully retreated. However, before he left, he saw Zhou Yu standing to the side. Minister Qin, hello. Looking at the person in front of him, Zhou Yu's face was filled with smiles as he spoke modestly. Oh, hello. You are. Zhou Yu recognized this middle-aged man, but the middle-aged man didn't recognize him, so he asked with some confusion. My name is Zhou Yu. I'm from the Ministry of Land and Resources. Hearing the middle-aged man's words, Zhou Yu immediately introduced himself. Oh, old Zhang's subordinate. You know Mr. Jiang? Then you've got it right. Hearing his introduction, this person couldn't help but smile and pat his head. Then, he looked at Jiang Hai and joked with him with a smile. Although he was half joking, Zhou Yu clearly heard some things from this person's words. For example, This Zhang Hai was definitely not simple. Not only did he know Minister Qin, but it seemed that Minister Qin had a favor to ask of him. At the same time, the most important thing was that Du Feimin, who he just mentioned, was very likely to be the protagonist of this banquet. Thinking of this, a thin layer of sweat appeared on Zhou Yu's forehead. Who exactly was this Zhang Hai? Was he really a guy with nothing to do? Or was he, as he said, a cattle farmer? When did a cattle farmer become friends with a rich man from the Middle East, and what they said could reach the heavens? Wasn't this bullshit? Dad. After joking around with Zhou Yu, Minister Qin left. As for Zhou Xian, he walked over to Zhou Yu, who was still in a daze, and softly called out to him. Hearing his son's words, Zhou Yu recovered from his shock. This Zhang Hai is definitely not an ordinary person. You just offended him. You'd better leave first. Pulling his puzzled son over, Zhou Yu leaned over and whispered in his ear. Hearing his father's words, Zhou Xian felt helpless, regretful, jealous, and scared. He was helpless because he knew that if Zhang Hai's identity was really not simple, then it would never be possible for him and Qili. He regretted it because he was blinded by his jealousy and anger. Why did he offend Zhang Hai? He was jealous because he didn't know what kind of luck this guy had. He actually had Minister Qin backing him up. Although Minister Qin did not know them, the father and son knew him. He was the deputy minister of the Ministry of State Security. Was that a joke? He was scared because he was really scared that Zhang Hai would deal with him. So after hearing Zhou Yu's words, he hesitated for a moment and quickly left. Although it was pitiful to lose this opportunity, he had to be alive. However, it was obvious that Zhou Xian was thinking too much because Zhang Hai really did not have the intention to deal with him at this time. Of course, if he kept appearing in front of him, then it would be hard to say. After meeting with Minister Qin, Zhang Hai went to the front of the restaurant and prepared to start sweeping the goods. When others came to such a banquet, talking was the most important thing, but for Zhang Hai, eating was the most important thing. Chapter 433. This kind of cocktail party was a rare opportunity for others. There were plenty of business opportunities and opportunities to curry favor with officials. Huaxia was a world based on officials after all. Since ancient times, it had been scholars, farmers, businessmen, and businessmen. Officials were more than one level above ordinary people. In the United States, money was everything, but in China, money was useless. Power was the most important. For Huaxia people, the business at the dinner table was the real business. The friendship at the dinner table was the friendship that could be deepened. Almost everyone was holding a glass of wine and swaying back and forth. Especially those rich businessmen. Their eyes were fixed on those high-ranking officials. If they could befriend one of them, not to mention how much money they could earn, if the other party could just give them a warning if the wind was blowing in the wrong direction, then it would be a great service. Even the underlings who had just joined, the Yin family, and the other two were looking around. They did not notice that at this time, in the outermost area, a taxi slowly drove over. Then with a bang, the front cover of the taxi emitted thick smoke. Then, a person wearing a loose taxi driver's uniform got out of the car helplessly. After making a phone call, he squatted in the distant woods and smoked. Although the camera was too far away and could not see the person's appearance clearly, it could clearly see the red that rose from time to time, which was the cigarette butt. Therefore, this scene did not attract the attention of the peripheral security guards. In fact, if someone came over to take a look, they would find that there was no cigarette butt here. It was nothing more than a reddish light spot, moving along with an electric hydraulic lever without any frequency. This red dot would go out for a period of time every 10 minutes or so and then light up again after a while. This was also considered high-tech. As for the original taxi driver, he used an almost unimaginable speed and quickly disappeared into the woods on both sides of the road. He quickly ran towards the parking lot in the distance. This black shadow was like a ghost. There was no sound, no movement, and just like that, it floated towards the villa. With Azalina handling things, Zhang Hai was very relieved. This doesn't mean that the KGB in Russia is stronger than our country. It was just that Azalina was a professional. Most importantly, she was in this line of work. Naturally, her means were much more professional than the average security personnel, even if some of these people came from the imperial city. Therefore, Zhang Hai was still very relaxed and didn't bother with the Yin family. He would let them be arrogant for a while. Then, he led Xueqi to the long table in the middle and began to look at the food in front of him. One had to admit that Du Feynman was very rich, and the people of the imperial court were very sincere. Although this banquet was held in the name of Du Feynman, the ingredients were truly the best ingredients in the country. Oh no, it could be said that they were the best ingredients in the world. In the long and cold dining hall, there were all kinds of food. The most eye-catching was the various kinds of sashimi. Bluefin tuna sashimi. The whole tuna looked no smaller than the ones in Zhang Hai's manor. The head and tail were still intact, but the meat on the body had been sliced into small thin slices, folded in half, and placed in the middle of the fish. Next to the tuna, there were lobster sashimi, Arctic scallop sashimi, mullet roe, sturgeon roe, hand-held sushi, and so on. At a glance, it really made people feel a little cold. Because Zhang Hai didn't eat raw food, no matter how valuable these things were, he didn't care about them. In addition to these sashimi and sushi, there were chocolate waterfalls, various fruit plates, cold dishes, sausages, and so on in front of him. Well, in fact, Zhang Hai didn't know much. He wasn't very clear about the specific things here. There were many things he hadn't seen before, but it didn't matter as long as they were delicious. So he walked along the table and ate. As he ate, a figure blocked his way. "Hey, I'm still looking for you. Brother, you're really late." Looking up, Zhang Hai saw Du Feynman's face. At this time, the Arabian royal was still wearing the same white robe as Zhang Hai saw him. Seeing Zhang Hai, he couldn't help but smile and pat Zhang Hai's shoulder enthusiastically. Zhang Hai was a little confused about his attitude, because the relationship between the two wasn't so close. They only had a relationship of buying and selling, and they had only met 3 times. His enthusiasm now made Zhang Hai a little confused. "Am I late? It's okay. I'm not here to look for someone. I'm here to eat." While stuffing some Goliath ham into his mouth, Zhang Hai said vaguely. No matter what he was planning, he would just go along with it. "I can see that you are indeed different, but you didn't eat the best food here." Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Du Feynman led Zhang Hai to a pile of sashimi. "Oh, Du Feynman, I don't eat raw things, so forget about the sashimi. Besides, there are also bluefin golden spears in my manor." Waving his hand, Zhang Hai indicated that Du Feynman didn't need to introduce him. He was indeed not used to eating raw things. "Hey brother, don't worry, I won't cheat you. Come and have a taste. If you don't like it, then forget it. Besides, I won't let you eat bluefin." However, when Du Feynman heard Zhang Hai's words, he shook his head and mysteriously led him to the front of a sashimi. This sashimi wasn't like the bluefin or lobster beside it. It didn't have a lobster head or a fish head to let people know what it was at first glance. This plate of sashimi was just a thin plate of fish, nothing more. "What is this?" Looking at the fish fillet in front of him, Zhang Hai asked with some confusion. "Unparalleled delicacy." Looking at Zhang Hai, Du Feynman smiled and directly picked up a piece with his hand. After dipping it in the sauce that had been prepared for him, he stuffed it into his mouth with a satisfied expression. Looking at his appearance, Zhang Hai also picked up a piece with his chopsticks, dipped it in some seasoning, and put it into his mouth. As soon as it entered his mouth, there was a fishy taste, which made Zhang Hai frown slightly. However, he didn't want to embarrass Du Feynman, so he gently took a bite. This bite made Zhang Hai's eyes light up instantly. The fish meat was like tendons. When Zhang Hai took a bite, not only did it have a bit of chewiness, which was very rare in fish meat, but this meat could be chewed in an instant after chewing. Every fiber of the fish meat would bounce against the teeth. This kind of texture would make people chew continuously subconsciously. Zhang Hai was the same. After chewing 3 times, the original fishy taste had completely disappeared, leaving only a fresh taste. Fresh. Especially fresh. The fish meat was smooth, bouncy, and a bit chewy. Even the abalones raised by Zhang Hai weren't as fresh as this. This made Zhang Hai extremely surprised. After eating 1 piece, he unexpectedly picked up his chopsticks and ate a second piece. Looking at Zhang Hai's satisfied expression, Du Feynman also smiled and started eating. "Okay, let's eat. What kind of meat is this? Why is it so delicious?" While chewing the fish meat in front of him, to be honest, although this meat was not as good as Zhang Hai's strongest beef, in terms of fish meat, it was already better than any fish meat that Zhang Hai had ever eaten. This made him a little curious. Of course, if he was curious, he wouldn't just ask. He could introduce it. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Du Feimin stuffed the fish meat into his mouth and said with a smile, "This is a pufferfish." Ah! However, after hearing his words, Zhang Hai's chopsticks couldn't help but pause. As mentioned before, Zhang Hai was a timid person. He was very afraid of death. This game was poisonous. It was different from soaking in alcohol. If he wasn't careful, he would die from eating it. This made him a little confused. Seeing Zhang Hai's surprised expression, Du Feimin said with a smile, "Don't worry, the chef who made this has a professional license." Moreover, before the dish was served, he had already eaten it an hour in advance. If nothing happened, it would be served. Otherwise, do you think your court would let it go easily if someone here was poisoned to death? Indeed, if anything were to happen to any of the people present today, it would be a huge shock to the country. However, today, Zhang Hai wanted to make it a shock. Of course, he didn't use this kind of fish meat. Sigh, I originally wanted to bring some back to raise, but it looks like it's impossible. Hearing Du Feimin's words, Zhang Hai sighed. It's possible to import it. This thing can be found everywhere, both in the country and abroad. However, there is a problem. That is, there are too few people who can make this thing. If Zhang Hai eats this thing, the gains won't make up for the losses. Sigh, this is nothing. This is only ranked in the top 10 of today's food. It's not even in the top 10. Let's go, I'll take you to eat something good. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Du Feimin smiled, then took the initiative to bring Zhang Hai to the teppanyaki. Seeing Du Feimin bring Zhang Hai over, the chef who was cooking couldn't help but nod. Then, he took out a plate of freshly made fried fish and handed it over. Looking at this plate of fried fish, many people who were just wandering nearby stopped. They looked at the fish in front of them in surprise, because these fish weren't very famous to foreigners. However, to the people in the country, this fish was actually a real ingredient with a sky-high price. Come try it. Actually, I heard that this kind of fish is best braised, but I don't like it. It's better this way. Dragging Zhang Hai along, Du Feimin arrived in front of the counter, picked up a fork, and began to eat. Zhang Hai also picked up a fish and put it in his mouth. In an instant, a freshness that was different from the blowfish filled his mouth. Chapter 434. Well, this fish tastes good, but it has too many bones. You foreigners don't like to eat fish with bones, right? After taking a bite, Zhang Hai asked Du Feimin in front of him while picking out the bones. This fish does taste fresh and quite good, but it has too many bones, which is troublesome to eat. Haha, that's why I fry it like this. After the bones are crisped, the taste is still very good. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Du Feimin also said with a smile, "This fish is best braised, but this is the reason why it is fried." What kind of fish is this? Zhang Hai is not used to eating fish with bones, so he said while picking out the bones, "This is Chongjiang swordfish." Hearing Zhang Tai's words, Qi Li, who had been picking out fish bones and eating fish behind Zhang Tai, interjected, "Chongjiang swordfish? This is Chongjiang swordfish?" Hearing Qi Li's words, Zhang Hai can't help but be surprised. Chongjiang swordfish has been very popular in recent years. It has grown from dozens of yuan per catty to hundreds, thousands, and even tens of thousands. Before going abroad, Zhang Hai had heard of Chongjiang swordfish and specially went to the seafood market to have a look. However, there is no Chongjiang swordfish in the seafood market of Bing City, only swordfish, but the swordfish is not expensive. He later learned about it. Although it is called Chongjiang swordfish, in fact, this fish has nothing to do with swordfish. The so-called swordfish refers to hairtail, which can grow to more than 1 meter long and has a large yield. It is one of the most productive marine fish. It is mainly produced in the Western Pacific Ocean and the Indian Ocean. Basically, it is located in warm waters and can also be cultivated. Zhang Hai's manor is located in the Atlantic Ocean. There is also this fish, but it is very rare. This fish's taste is ordinary, and the meat is also very ordinary, so Zhang Hai usually does not catch it. Just like the hairtail in Zhang Hai's manor, the biggest one is almost 1.5 meters long. Zhang Hai does not know how big it will grow. Anyway, Zhang Hai does not intend to eat it. The Yangtze River grenadier fish is not this kind of hairtail fish. It is a kind of freshwater fish and its scientific name is the long-jawed fish. Although this type of fish was very valuable in China, it was not the only type of fish in China. This type of fish could be found in the whole of Asia and even the whole world. This type of fish could be found in the Yangtze River basin of Huaxia, Malaysia, Borneo, Phuket, and even the Amazon River basin. However, other than in China, there were no overseas markets for this type of fish. But now that it was mentioned, Zhang Hai was a little tempted. He was afraid that the pufferfish would be poisonous, but there was nothing wrong with raising this fish. Is it very difficult to breed? There was no such thing in Zhang Hai's dictionary. Once spiritual energy appeared, everything would have to bow down. Looks like I'm going to build a river in the manor. After thinking for a while, Zhang Hai muttered in his heart. Originally, he wanted to make a freshwater river because he wanted to eat eels, so he had to breed them himself. But this was just an idea. After all, it was impossible for him to make a river just to eat eels. It would cost a lot of money. Although Zhang Hai was not short of money, he didn't need to waste too much money. After all, no one ate eels in Boston. Foreigners didn't eat eels. Zhang Hai remembered watching a program about food. Huaxia and French chefs competed. They chose ingredients for each other. As a result, after the French got the eels, they didn't know how to cook them. Western food was different from place to place. But if the first Western food was French and Italian, even the French chefs didn't know how to cook eels. What kind of market would there be in the United States? Therefore, it was not Zhang Hai's style to only go out and not go in. But now it seemed that it was a good idea to build a river. He could raise some freshwater very valuable fish and sell them to Chile. Thinking about it, once the Yangtze River grenadier fish was launched in the restaurant, it was estimated that the price could be increased many times. Moreover, there was no need to build a river, divert water, or pump water. There were many small rivers in the Boston area. He could just draw one over. If he didn't want to draw water, he could dig a river himself. The underground water was also quite rich. How much would it cost to dig a river? Zhang Hai didn't care about this. After memorizing the scientific name of the long-jawed swordfish in his mind, Zhang Hai began to focus his attention on other things. Not to mention, when he looked at it, he really saw a cooked fish. This fish looks a bit like the American redfish, but it's not quite the same. He picked up a piece and took a bite. Zhang Hai couldn't help but nod. The taste of this fish is also good. This is a large yellow croaker. Recently, it's very expensive. The molded ones are sold for nearly 1,000 yuan per catty, and the smaller ones are sold for about 800 yuan. Seeing that Zhang Hai seemed to be very satisfied, Chile hurriedly said, "This is not bad, I can raise it." Hearing Chile's words, Zhang Hai was shocked. To be honest, the taste of yellow croaker was better than the average American redfish, but it was almost the same as the American redfish raised by Zhang Hai, or even slightly worse. However, no matter how good the American redfish was, it only sold for 60 yuan per catty in China. In the United States, it was about $10 per catty, which was much more expensive than cod. However, this yellow croaker, which was also a member of the family Cyprinidae, could be sold for 10 times the price of the American redfish. Again, Zhang Hai could raise any fish, so he couldn't help but be tempted. If Zhang Hai wanted to raise 1,000,000 of them, other people would only be able to raise them up to 8 ounces in a year. However, Zhang Hai would have no problem raising them up to 2 catties. 1 catty was $80. 2 catties would be $160. 1,000,000 of them would be $160. What if he raised 2,000,000 fish, or 3,000,000 fish? In the past, Zhang Hai had always thought that his main source of income was on land. This was because beef was very valuable, but now his cattle had almost reached their limit. Therefore, he had to think of other ways to earn money. The fish in the sea were very good. If he could raise these fish, or even raise bluefin fishes, just supplying them to Japan and Huaxia would be enough for him to earn as much as he did on land. Now that he thought about it, he had no choice but to choose the American red fish because there were not many types of fish sold in the United States. They had to ensure their own species characteristics and could not casually introduce foreign species. What if one day, these fish were worthless, just like the Asian carp now? Who could they go to cry to? Looking at the food in front of him, Zhang Hai's mind was spinning. Originally, When he asked Minister Qin to import domestic species, Zhang Hai's first thought was goats, pigs, and the like. Now, it seemed that he was stupid. Even if he wanted to import, he had to import these things. He was really too naive back then. The taste of this fish is indeed not bad, but because it has too many bones, I only ranked it 10th among today's ingredients. Let's go, I'll bring you to the 9th place. After patting Zhang Hai, Du Feimin continued to bring Zhang Hai to the barbecue area in the distance. The barbecue chef here was brought over by Du Feimin from Arabia, and the ingredients were also brought over by him from Arabia. This is today's 9th delicacy, camel hump. After bringing Zhang Hai here, a waiter respectfully took 3 skewers of meat from the grill and placed them on a plate. Then, he passed them to Zhang Hai, Qi Li, and Du Feimin. Camel hump. Looking at the meat in front of him, Zhang Hai hesitated for a moment. He indeed knew that Arabian barbecue was the best. Speaking of which, Arabian barbecue was the best in the world. It was not a joke, but camel hump. He knew that this thing was edible. In the ancient Manchu and Han imperial banquets, the first of the 8 treasures was camel hump. However, to be honest, when Zhang Hai imagined the appearance of camel hump, he really did not feel like eating it. Seeing that Zhang Hai was a little hesitant, Du Feimin took a bite first and then said with a smile, "Try it, it's very good." Seeing that Du Feimin had eaten, Zhang Hai also took a bite after hesitating for a moment. However, other than the resistance in his heart, when the camel hump entered his mouth, Zhang Hai's eyes could not help but light up. This meat was indeed very delicious. Camel hump was the place where camels stored energy, nutrients, and water. There were no bones here, only meat and fat. However, due to the constant storage of water throughout the year, the lean meat here naturally had the effect of tenderness and powder. The meat was very soft. The fat on the outside, after being roasted, turned into oil, but it was not greasy. In ancient times, some aristocrats liked to eat this thing very much. Of course, there were very few people who ate this thing now. After all, not many people raised camels. Camel hump was rich in protein, fat, calcium, scale, iron, vitamin A, B1, B2, and niacin. The gelatinous fat in the meat was also known as hump oil. It was sweet and non-toxic. It had the effect of moisturizing dryness, cooling the wind, promoting blood circulation, and eliminating germs. It was a rare delicacy. Zhang Hai was very satisfied with this meat. However, he did not intend to raise camels. It was not easy to raise them. Most importantly, Zhang Hai did not lack meat. This is the 9th one, and the one I ranked second is the Kobe beef. However, your beef is not worse than this one, so I guess you have long been tired of eating it. Looking at Zhang Hai's satisfied expression, Du Feimin smiled and pointed to another row of meat skewers. He specially went to Japan to buy this meat. The price was not cheap. However, although eating this kind of beef was very normal for Zhang Hai, he still made a skewer and ate it. He had never eaten Kobe beef before. He wanted to try it and see if it tasted good. Generally speaking, it tasted similar to his own beef. However, there were some subtle differences. After all, it was not the same breed of beef. However, the texture was almost the same. Of course, the taste was far worse, because one was made by Zhang Hai, and the other was made by a chef. However, compared to Qi Li's restaurant, the taste was not much different. Qi Li also ate a piece and nodded on the surface. However, in her heart, she had already made up her mind. She must tie Zhang Hai, not only for him, but also for his cows. Chapter 435. Come on. Try this. After eating the 2nd and 9th dishes in Du Feimin's heart, Du Feimin continued to bring Zhang Hai to a place further away. This was the 8th dish in his heart. Fish lips. Fish lips had a long history in Xueqi. It was part of the 4 treasures series, just like the camel hump. However, it was part of the 8 treasure series. The so-called fish lips were made from the lips of sharks or some large fish, including the skin, eyes, and cheeks. Among them, sharks and rays belong to the normal species. Other than that, they could also be made from sturgeon, and large yellow croaker. Among them, not many people knew about the sturgeon. This fish looked like a huge sturgeon. It was only found in Xuexia's Heilongjiang province, the border between Russia, and in Europe. It was divided into 2 groups. This type of fish could grow very big. The heaviest fish could reach 1 ton. It had a long lifespan, a strong body, great strength, and a large appetite. It was said that this type of fish had existed for hundreds of millions of years. It was known as the living fossil in the water. The original type of Ice City's expensive fish. There were not many of this type of fish, and the price varied. There was no accurate price. The cheap ones were a few dozen RMB per catty, and the expensive ones were a few hundred RMB per catty. There was no fixed price. The fish lips that Zhang Hai and the rest were eating were from this type of fish. The taste was quite good. However, it was impossible to taste this thing. After all, it was not easy to get. The 7th dish on Du Feimin's menu was a vegetarian dish. It was a type of mushroom called cloud incense mushroom. Perhaps even a professional mushroom farmer wouldn't know about this. This thing was also one of the 4 treasures, belonging to the 8 treasures of grass. It was very rare, and there was no way to cultivate it. It was just like pine mills. Of course, pine mills grew from pine trees. There were plenty of pine trees, so there were plenty of pine mills. Therefore, although there was no way to cultivate them, pine mills were still sold. In Du Feimin's eyes, the 6th dish was a type of bird, quail. This type of bird tasted good when roasted. Of course, the main thing was that the chef's skills were good enough. The 5th was fish roe. There was no need to talk about it. Sturgeon, salmon, and mullet were all very good fish roe. They also tasted very fragrant. In 4th place was the flying dragon. Zhang Hai had a lot of them. Well, not exactly a lot, but at least he had something to eat. The 3rd was truffle, the so-called truffle cake. Zhang Hai went to eat it. Although he was a little surprised that this plant was so expensive, to be honest, the truffle's taste was ordinary to him. At least he wasn't as obsessed as Westerners. On the other hand, it could be seen that Zhang Hai was only interested in meat. However, after knowing the price of this thing, he also considered if he should plant some in his own forest. Truffles were of different sizes and had different prices. Truffles with a diameter of more than 5 centimeters were far more expensive than those with a diameter of 1 to 2 centimeters. A kilogram of 1 to 2 centimeters of black truffles was about $500, which was a pretty good price. But for truffles with a diameter of more than 5 centimeters, 2 zeros would be added to the price, which was $50,000 per kilogram. 1 gram of gold was worth $200, so 1 kilogram was only $200,000. $50,000 per kilogram of black truffle was equivalent to $300,000. It wasn't wrong to say that truffles were more expensive than gold. As for white truffles, they were even more expensive. In 2007, 1.5 kilograms of white truffle was sold for $330,000. That was in 2007. If it were now, the price would be at least 50% higher. 150 grams of white truffle was worth $500,000. 1 gram of white truffle was worth $333, which was about $2,000. It was bullshit to say that it was equivalent to diamonds, but it was definitely comparable to platinum. This was the delicacy that Du Feimin placed 3rd. The 2nd was Kobe beef, which Du Feimin had already introduced. Finally, the 1st was a soup. Although it was a cocktail party hosted by Du Feimin, this soup was only available to those who were invited. But Zhang Hai could drink as much as he wanted. Zhang Hai glanced at it. He recognized the sea cucumber and black chicken, but there was something else that Zhang Hai wasn't too sure about. What is this? Zhang Hai asked Du Feimin as he scooped out the thing with a spoon. Ah, this is the most valuable thing in this soup. I heard that Yu Hua Xia people call this flour glue. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Du Feimin said with a serious face. In order to buy this thing, his heart ached a little. Pepper? Isn't that a small grain? Hearing Du Feimin's words, Zhang Hai was a little confused. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Qi Li's eyes lit up and she explained to him, "It's flour glue, the glue of glue, a kind of tonic made from fish maw. As the old saying goes, the belly of abalone, ginseng, and shark fin is the belly of the belly. This thing is also called fish maw." Flour glue was fish maw, one of the 8 treasures of the sea. It was made from the swim bladders of large fish. Different fish made from different materials naturally had different prices. The more common ones were fish maw and eel maw. The better ones were large yellow fish maw, also called yellow flour glue. The same quality was sturgeon, yellow sturgeon, white flour glue. Different fish had different prices. The more common was yellow flour glue. The longer it was kept, the better it was. Generally, newly made ones were sold for about 400 yuan per catty. Those that were more than 3 years old could be sold for 1,000 yuan per catty. Those that were more than 10 years old could be sold for tens of thousands per catty. Hearing Qi Li's words, Zhang Hai couldn't help but be a little surprised. Even if it was sold for tens of thousands per catty, it didn't seem very expensive. For an average family, it wasn't something they couldn't afford, although it would be a little painful. Moreover, for a nouveau riche like Du Feynman, tens of thousands per catty was nothing. This flour glue is said to be made from the darts of Chinese bahaba fish. This pot of soup cost me $7 million. Perhaps seeing Zhang Hai's confusion, Du Feynman shook his head and sighed as he drank the soup. 7 million? Hearing his words, Zhang Hai was a little confused. How did tens of thousands of yuan become $7 million? $7 million was more than $40 million. $40 million for a pot of soup? Alright, this was a real nouveau riche. It's actually from Chinese bahaba fish. This is good stuff. Hearing Du Feynman's words, Qi Li also sped up drinking the soup. Chinese bahaba fish? Hearing what she said, Zhang Hai couldn't help but scratch his head in a daze. He seemed to have heard of this fish before. Before he went abroad, when he was browsing online, he seemed to have seen the price of this fish. It was said that a fisherman in Guangdong province caught this kind of fish and was bought by a rich businessman for 1.7 million. Then, he sold it for more than 3 million. At that time, he only thought about it. Later, when he bought the fish to raise, he only considered the fish of the Atlantic Ocean. After all, at that time, he didn't know much about the spirit qi in his body. Now, it seemed like he could kill anything in his way. However, he didn't dare to test it lightly back then. If he lost money, it would be his entire fortune. Unlike now, he didn't panic because he had money in his hands. However, if this fish was really so valuable, then Zhang Hai could consider it. However, Zhang Hai only thought about it now. One had to know that this fish was a second-class protected animal in the country. He and Minister Qin had once said that it didn't matter if it was an unprotected animal or a protected one. They could bring it in at any time. However, this kind of protected fish needed to be considered. Looking at the bowl of soup in front of him, Zhang Hai's mind also became active. What are you looking at? This kind of fish glue is not common. Seeing that Zhang Hai had been staring at the bowl of soup in front of him, Du Feynman waved the bowl in front of him and then said to him with a smile, "Oh, I'm thinking. Well, forget it. Let's wait until I succeed. By the way, Du Feynman, when did our relationship become so close? Why didn't I know?" There was still half a bowl of soup left in his hand and he gave it to Qi Li. To be honest, Zhang Hai was very interested in this kind of fish, but he didn't like to drink this bowl of soup. However, Qi Li regarded it as a treasure. "Hey, I'm very sad to hear you say that. You Chinese say it well. Strangers the first time, friends the second time, and good friends the third time. This is the fourth time we've met. Naturally, we're friends." Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Du Feynman's eyes lit up. He then smiled and put his arm around Zhang Hai's shoulder and said with a smile, "But the problem is that you're not Chinese. So, let's talk about it. I still have a task to shoulder." Looking at Du Feynman, Zhang Hai shrugged and looked at him with disdain. The two of them were about the same age, but there was really a big gap in status. Zhang Hai wouldn't treat Du Feynman as a friend. Of course, he believed that Du Feynman wouldn't either. "You're still so cautious. Okay, I'll tell you." Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Du Feynman also smiled and said. Of course, the two of them didn't talk in the crowd. Instead, they deliberately went to the balcony on the second floor. There were many bodyguards outside to make sure that their words wouldn't be heard by anyone. Even Qi Li was left downstairs by Zhang Hai. And their figures were also seen by Minister Qin as they went upstairs. A trace of nervousness flashed across his face. He knew that Zhang Hai and Du Feynman had already started to contact each other. Whether this matter could be done or not depended on Zhang Hai. The reason why I held this banquet this time was to choose a middleman. After ascertaining that there was no third person, Du Feynman looked at Zhang Hai. His originally enthusiastic face had turned slightly cold as he slowly said, "Don't worry. Middleman? Hearing his words, Zhang Hai frowned. What does this mean? Chapter 436. Du Feimin smiled when he saw Zhang Hai's puzzled look. That's right. He wants Zhang Hai to be the middleman. After that, Du Feimin explained to Zhang Hai why he is so close to Zhang Hai. Although Dubai was only a small country, the other Arabian kingdoms were all in the same boat. It could be said that they were bound together for good or ill. This time, Du Feimin not only represented Dubai, but also the other Arabian countries. What do the Arabs produce? Well, apart from the terrorists, the only thing that was successful in producing oil was oil. This was also the foundation of their existence in this world. Their oil was mainly sold to the United States and some European countries. It could be said that although they were rich now, the money was given by the people who bought the oil. In other words, their oil is a buyer's market. If the US and European countries like the UK and France want to buy it, they can make a fortune. If they don't want to buy it, they can just let it rot in their hands. If someone says they want to buy oil, who will not buy it? If the US does not want to buy it, they can just sell it to other countries. But the problem is, do they dare to do it? The Arab royals are rich, but they are not as rich as the US and European countries. This is the biggest problem. They must be prepared for danger in times of peace. Now, they need the royals to stabilize the world. But what if they don't need them one day? Thinking about the wars they had fought in recent years, whether it was Iraq or Afghanistan, why did the United States attack them? Why did the US attack them? First, it is because they are using bombs. But North Korea is using bombs every day, and the US does not dare to attack them. Of course, the other reason is because North Korea is backed by Huaxia and Soviet Russia. But this is only a theory. Cuba is so close to the US, and the US did not attack them even though they are using bombs every day. This is because these countries do not have what the US needs, such as oil. Wars are not fought for reputation. They were fighting for money. At the very least, they had to be able to earn it back after this battle. This was the philosophy of the West. Therefore, Afghanistan was destroyed, and Iraq was destroyed. Of course, all of this had nothing to do with Zhang Hai, and he had no interest in politics. However, Zhang Hai understood Du Feimin's words. It was impossible for these Arab countries to put all their eggs in one basket. But on the surface, they didn't dare to sell oil to Huaxia, who was the biggest threat to the US government. Therefore, no matter how much the imperial court tried to persuade them, they didn't dare to give in. Because if anyone sold them out and caused a war, with Huaxia's current foreign policy, it was impossible for them to send troops to help. No one wanted to be the second Iraq. Originally, one party was willing to sell and the other party was willing to buy. This was a very simple matter. But the problem was that America was in the middle. Therefore, Du Feimin needed a middleman. He needed an excuse. Whether he was persuaded or threatened, he needed a middleman to divert attention. He originally organized this banquet to find a middleman. But it just so happened that Zhang Hai came back. Rather than find a middleman who he didn't know, he might as well find Zhang Hai. Moreover, Zhang Hai had $400 million of oil futures in his hands. When he heard his words, Zhang Hai was silent for the first time. The first thought that popped up in his mind was that he shouldn't get involved in this muddy water. He was just an idiot. He didn't have any ambition. If he didn't do well, he would become the pressure point between China and the United States. Zhang Hai would be depressed to death. However, what Du Feimin said next made Zhang Hai hesitate. There were only two words. Benefits. The benefits of Zhang Hai being a lobbyist for Huaxia didn't need to be mentioned. Those benefits were still in Penelope's leather bag. To Zhang Hai, those benefits were real. And if he helped Du Feimin would also give him benefits. The benefits were still in two words. Oil. Zhang, to be honest, there are very few oil futures in the outside world, but we have a lot of them. If you are the middleman, we can decide how much you want and sell it to you at a fair price. Under the moonlight, Du Feimin looked at Zhang Hai and smiled gently. He knew that Zhang Hai didn't have much resistance to these words. You really are a bastard. Hearing his words, Zhang Hai's heart itched like a cat was scratching it. Thank you for the compliment, but this is politics. Aside from politics, we can still be friends. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Du Feimin smiled and said, for him, This was a profitable deal. I want 600 million oil futures now. If I want more, can I buy more? Looking at Du Feynman, Zhang Hai hesitated for a moment before asking him. Now, Zhang Hai only had 600 million in cash. When he sold gems and other things, he earned less than 1 billion. Of which, 400 million was exchanged for oil futures, and he still had more than 50,000. In addition, he earned more than 300 million from selling cows. Now, Zhang Hai still had more than 800 million in cash. However, the Winthrop construction needed to spend $250 million, so Zhang Hai still had 600 million in cash left. These tens of millions were pocket money and couldn't be used. But the 600 million was useless in the bank. Zhang Hai could exchange it for something more valuable. Oil futures were basically a 20% premium in the current market. If he had 1 billion in oil futures, it would be equivalent to making 200 million for no reason. Most importantly, if he couldn't survive, he could seek refuge with some American tycoons. Even if he went to the White House, he would definitely be a guest of honor with 1 billion in oil futures. Deal, I can sell it to you again. The price is unlimited, but the only requirement is that you can't buy it with others. I'll only sell it to you. Looking at Zhang Hai, Du Feynman chuckled and said, as long as Zhang Hai was willing to be the middleman, not to mention 1 billion oil futures, even 10 billion oil futures would be worth it. Of course, the premise was that Zhang Hai could take out 10 billion. The current Zhang Hai didn't have that much money. But it didn't mean that he wouldn't have it in the future. Of course, the future he was talking about wasn't 10 or 20 years from now. In this world, people were the most unreliable. Du Feynman was so easy to talk to now, but it didn't mean that he would be so easy to talk to in the future when he and Xueqi had a stable business. It wasn't rare to get rid of someone once they had outlived their usefulness in politics. Therefore, Zhang Hai needed to get the money as quickly as possible. As for how to get it, did it even need to be said? A man couldn't get rich without a windfall, and a horse couldn't get fat without feeding at night. The best way to get Zhang Hai's feeding at night was to sink a ship. He still had the addresses of many shipwrecks in the Caribbean. What others couldn't get didn't mean that he couldn't either. Since there was a first time, there would be a second time, a third time, a fourth time. One ship was worth $1 billion. What about 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8? Du Feynman seemed to be certain that Zhang Hai wouldn't have too much money in a short time, so he would let him bleed a little. The conversation with Du Feynman only lasted for half an hour. Then, Zhang Hai left the second floor with him and stepped into the venue on the first floor. As soon as they came down, Minister Qin saw Zhang Hai immediately. Seeing the smiles on their faces, he knew that this matter was likely to succeed. He couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. It seemed that he had found the right person to look for Zhang Hai this time. He couldn't help but walk over excitedly. He wanted to have a private talk with Zhang Hai later to see what the specific situation was. The other two groups of people who were paying attention to Zhang Hai were Zhou Yu and the Yin family. At that moment, the three members of the Yin family were consciously standing in a corner. After entering the room, although they had already noticed Zhang Hai and Qi Li, they didn't have the leisure to provoke them. Instead, they handed out business cards everywhere, hoping to climb up the social ladder. However, it was a pity that people at this level would more or less dislike their family. Originally, they didn't expect to be able to make friends with these bigwigs through this banquet. They were just there to show their sincerity. After giving out business cards, they had a chance to meet. If they asked for favors in the future, it would be easier to talk to them. After giving out business cards for a long time, they finally got everyone's business cards. Of course, Du Feynman, Zhang Hai, and Qi Li couldn't accept them. Now that they saw Zhang Hai and Du Feynman coming down from upstairs together, the three people couldn't help but feel a little jealous. This wasn't some melodramatic novel. Logically speaking, at this time, Zhang Wu should be showing off in front of his love rival, Zhang Hai, and stepping on Du Feynman while he was at it. Then, after learning Du Feynman's identity, he would be extremely terrified and get beaten up before being chased out. He would harbor a grudge in his heart. If he couldn't take revenge on Du Feynman, he would use his connections to take revenge on Zhang Hai. Assassinations, hooligans looking for trouble, suppression from the imperial court, and so on. Unfortunately, it was really difficult for these things to happen in the real world. Now, let alone looking for trouble with Du Feynman, even if they were closer to Du Feynman, They would be watched by the bodyguards. Not to mention showing off. As for the 3 things mentioned at the end, other than looking for trouble with hooligans, it was more reliable. Assassinations and suppression from the imperial court were impossible. After all, who was Zhang Hai now? He was Du Feimin's guest. Even the imperial court asked for help from Zhang Hai. Under such circumstances, it was too late to curry favor with Zhang Hai. Not to mention suppressing Zhang Hai. So now when they looked at Zhang Hai, other than envy, jealousy, and hatred, they had no other thoughts. They didn't dare to make a move. Of course, the person called Zhang Rue in Boston was indeed one of them. However, just because they didn't dare to harm Zhang Hai, it didn't mean that Zhang Hai didn't dare to harm them. Chapter 437. Seeing that you are so happy, you must have done it? Looking at Zhang Hai, who was separated from Du Feimin, Minister Qin walked over to Zhang Hai with a smile and asked in a low voice. Of course, I'll leave the rest to you and the imperial court. Although this was just a favor, after all, Du Feimin also intended to sell Huaxia's oil, and he was just an excuse. Zhang Hai was not going to let go of this favor. Especially when Huaxia didn't know about this. Hearing Minister Qin's words, Zhang Hai also smiled and said softly, You are really good. The imperial court owes you a favor. What we agreed on will not change. If you need anything in the future, just let me know. Hearing that Zhang Hai had really done it, Minister Qin couldn't help but wave his fist. This time, he had solved a major problem of the imperial court. Don't wait for the future, I have something to say now. Hearing that Minister Qin was about to leave, Zhang Hai stopped him. What? Has the situation changed? Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Minister Qin was stunned for a moment. What does Zhang Hai mean? Nothing has changed. But didn't our conditions say that I can introduce some animals? I want to introduce 3 kinds of animals now. Looking at Minister Qin, Zhang Hai said seriously. Okay, that's not a problem. Hearing Zhang Hai say this, Minister Qin naturally smiled. What is this? I heard that we can already breed Yangtze River grenadier fish in our country, so the first thing I want is the fry of Yangtze River grenadier fish. Looking at Minister Qin, Zhang Hai said seriously. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Minister Qin didn't hesitate. Because he didn't know how difficult it was to raise Yangtze River grenadier fish. Indeed, there were artificial breeding methods in China now, and there were about 400,000 fish a year. However, 2/3 of them couldn't survive the first month, and the remaining 1/3 required a lot of manpower to take care of. The most important thing was that this kind of fish couldn't be raised in captivity. It was a migratory fish, and it was not easy to cultivate it with the technology of seawater culture. Because of this kind of fish was really difficult to get. Of course, the so-called difficult to obtain mainly depended on the efforts of the higher-ups. In Huaxia, there was nothing that the imperial court could not do. Okay, that's not a problem. I'll check which fish farm has it. I've heard that this thing is very expensive. It's very likely that you'll have to go to Shanghai to get it. But as long as it's available in China, I'll let you take it away. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Minister Qin smiled and answered seriously. If Zhang Hai was only after money, then everything was fine. Well, in addition to Yangtze River grenadier fish, I also want the fry of giant yellow croaker. Hearing him say it so easily, Zhang Hai was relieved. It was difficult for others to raise Yangtze River grenadier fish, but it wasn't difficult for Zhang Hai. He just needed to inject spiritual qi into its body, even if it was only a trace of spiritual qi, and Zhang Hai used water plants with spiritual qi to raise it. How could the fish want to die? It was so difficult. That's not a problem. Compared with Yangtze River grenadier fish, giant yellow croaker was easier to find and cheaper. There were many fry in the coastal area. Moreover, Zhang Hai said to buy it, not that it was free. It didn't matter who he sold it to. As for whether it had been divided, it had nothing to do with Minister Qin. As the higher-ups said, they had to sell it even if they didn't want to. Even if it had been put in the net, they had to take it out and let Zhang Hai take it away. This was the magnanimity of the imperial court. The last one is Chinese bahaba fish. Seeing that there was no problem with the first 2 kinds of fish, Zhang Hai smiled. This was a good start, so he asked for the 3rd kind of fish. However, Minister Qin couldn't help but frown when he heard this fish. Because he knew that although this fish was expensive, it was not easy to sell this kind of fish, because this fish was a protected animal. Well, I can think of a way, but it's impossible to buy it by quantity. At most, we can sell it by the strips. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Minister Qin hesitated and said to Zhang Hai. Hearing what he said, Zhang Hai nodded. He knew that selling by the strips was not a bad idea. Looking at Minister Qin, Zhang Hai asked in a low voice, "How many can you get?" "At most 10. Let me see. If possible, I'll make a population for you." Minister Qin listened to Zhang Hai's words and carefully replied, "Gather a population, this is also an insider's word. Because if a population wants to reproduce, without 3 generations of inbreeding, it needs at least 8 for pairs." Hearing his words, Zhang Hai nodded. 8 is 8. It's better than none. Seeing that Zhang Hai agreed, Minister Qin smiled and immediately left. He still has to report this incident to the imperial court. The Arabian side is willing to sell oil. This is good news. Seeing that Minister Qin left, Zhang Hai also smiled. Just when he was about to eat something again, he noticed a figure sneaking into the venue. Seeing this figure, Zhang Hai smiled and greeted him. "Is it done?" Walking to the side of the figure, Zhang Hai whispered to the man wearing a waiter's uniform. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, this person froze for a moment, then raised his head and laughed self-deprecatingly. "As expected of the boss. You can still recognize me even though I look like this?" Listening to Zhang Hai's words, Azalina's slightly cold voice came from under this completely different appearance. At this time, Azalina didn't look like a woman, not even an Asian. If one looked at her face, they would at most think that she was a handsome young man. She had black eyes, a nose that wasn't as straight, a sharp jaw, and slightly yellow skin. She was about 1.75 meters tall and looked very thin. Her chest was also very flat, and she had a moving Adam's apple. No one would treat her as a woman. However, Zhang Hai was able to see through her disguise at a glance. This was because anyone who was used to eating the meat in his manner would have a familiar aura around them. When he felt this aura, he immediately knew who this person was. Of course, people who only ate a few meals or even a dozen meals wouldn't have this aura. Only people who ate every day would have this aura, because this aura was so little that it was hard to notice if one didn't eat every day. Of course, Zhang Hai wouldn't tell Azalina how he found her. It was very cool to maintain a little mystery in front of his subordinates, so Zhang Hai just glanced at her and said indifferently, "It's been solved. On the way back, I'll invite the boss to watch a free fireworks show." Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Azalina chuckled and said slowly to Zhang Hai. Hearing what she said, Zhang Hai also laughed. Looking at the 3 people who were standing there and trying to integrate into the other circles, Zhang Hai's eyes became cold. At this time, Qili also noticed Zhang Hai and walked over from a distance. In just half an hour, Qili was holding a thick stack of business cards in her hand. To be honest, she was originally in the same position as the Yin family. It was impossible for them to participate in such a banquet, let alone be the main character. This time, the reason why Qili became the main character in these people's eyes and tried to give her business cards was mainly because of one person, Zhang Hai. Among the people present, except for Qili, the Yin family, and Azalina, no one knew who Zhang Hai was. But everyone only knew that Zhang Hai had a relationship with Minister Qin of the Ministry of State Security. At the same time, Zhang Hai was also friends with the organizer of this banquet, Dufayman Vier Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum. One was a high-level official of the imperial court, and the other was a rich man in the Middle East. Being friends with these 2 people was worth more than 10,000 ordinary rich people and ordinary officials. It was a bit presumptuous to go directly to Zhang Hai, because they didn't know Zhang Hai's name. But it was easy to find Qili. Although the cheese group was not qualified, at least they knew about it. First he would get to know Qili. Then, he would give her his business card. As for whether it would reach Zhang Hai's ears, that would be another story. "Phew, I kind of regret coming with you. I've become your secretary." Seeing Qili come over, Azalina deliberately left first to avoid trouble. Qili came to Zhang Hai's side. She really didn't recognize Azalina, but stuffed the stack of business cards into Zhang Hai's hand. Zhang Hai just glanced at it casually. This pile of business cards was really interesting. This was a company director, and this was a department director. Yes, department director. People at the department level were definitely not qualified to come to this banquet. And this so-called department was a department with the word state, not a department in the capital. There was a lot of knowledge in this. If this was a book about business or official career, it would be obvious. These business cards would definitely be very useful in the future. But unfortunately, the main theme of this book was leisure and farming. So these things were really useless. Jiang Hai glanced at the stack of business cards and stuffed them into his pocket. Looking at Jiang Hai's action, regardless of whether Jiang Hai would look at them in the future, at least he accepted them now. This was a good sign for these people. Hearing Qi Li's complaint, Jiang Hai smiled and said to Qi Li, "You don't have to accept them if you don't want to." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Qi Li couldn't help but smile, and then looked at Jiang Hai with sparkling eyes. "Do you think I'm you? I still have to make a living in China. How about I find a professional manager and then go to the United States with you?" Ugh, hee hee. But hearing her words, Jiang Hai was terrified. If they were really husband and wife, then she didn't want to come. Jiang Hai had to let her come. But the problem now was that there was some trouble between them. "Look at how scared you are. For the time being, I won't go." Seeing Jiang Hai's reaction, Qi Li sighed. It seemed that she still didn't do well enough. But she also knew that she had hurt Jiang Hai's heart before. Now it wasn't so easy to get it back. She had to work hard for this. Chapter 438. Miss Dale. Sitting on the windowsill of the hotel, Delina looked at Penelope Dale, who was cleaning up dinner over there, and said softly. Hearing her words, Penelope couldn't help but raise her head and look at the little girl in front of her. Because Jiang Hai, Azalina, and Qi Li all went to do Feynman's banquet, Penelope and the others had to deal with dinner by themselves. Fortunately, Jiang Hai left them a lot of money, and there was also a lot of money for the room. Whether they went out to eat or ate in the hotel, there was no problem. Of course, Delina and Marian wanted to go out to eat. They were now very curious about the country where Jiang Hai was born. However, Penelope was not at ease, so in the end, they still ate in the hotel. They didn't even go to the restaurant, but asked someone to send them food. Fortunately, the food here was also good, and the three of them were very happy. After dinner, Penelope was cleaning up, while Delina and Marian sat in the distance, playing with their mobile phones or looking out of the window. Suddenly, Delina asked Penelope, which attracted the attention of the three people in the room. "Just call me Penelope, Delina. What's the matter?" Listening to Delina's words, Penelope Dale smiled and continued to clean up in front of her with her head down. The relationship between the surname and first name of Americans was similar to that of Chinese people. Although it was the first name and the last name, generally speaking, people who were not very familiar with each other would call each other by their surname, such as Boss Zhang, Teacher Wang, Master Lu, and so on. In the United States, people who were not very familiar with each other would call each other by their surname instead of their first name. For example, basketball stars, Michael Jordan, were basically called Jordan, and Shaquille O'Neal were all called O'Neal. Except for Kobe Bryant, basically 99% of basketball stars were called by their surname instead of their first name. Only people who were close to each other could call each other by their first name. Now, for example, Penelope had already regarded Delina and Marian as friends, so she took the initiative to call them by their first name. She could omit the last name. "All right, Penelope, how old are you this year?" Looking at Penelope, Daliana asked in puzzlement. "Me? I'm 4 years younger than your dad. I'm already 24 this year." Hearing her words, Penelope smiled and said, "Oh, then it seems that you're not much older than us." Hearing her words, Daliana raised her head and said seriously, "Haha, it seems like I should be happy to hear that," Penelope said after hearing Daliana's words. "Hee hee, it's all right. You're indeed not much older than us. You probably don't know what I want to ask." Daliana smiled brightly when she saw Penelope's grateful expression. "Then," she said helplessly, "tell me about it." "Although I'm not that much older than you, I've experienced more than you, so I can understand most things," Penelope said with a smile when she saw Daliana's vexed look. "That's true, but I want to ask you something. You can't tell anyone about it. Do you know what to do?" After hesitating for a few moments, Daliana looked at Penelope and asked curiously, Ugh, why are you asking this? Upon hearing Daliana's words, Penelope was stunned. I'm just curious. Don't think that I don't know anything. I'm already 17 years old this year. According to Xueqi, I'm already 18 years old. It's not like you don't know where I used to live. In the past, I've seen those older sisters doing that. But back then, they seemed to be in great pain. They screamed miserably, knitted their brows, and sometimes even bled. That made me afraid of that, Daliana said with knitted brows. Upon hearing her words, Marian also walked over and held Daliana's hand. As for Penelope, she also felt a little awkward. Indeed, these two girls couldn't be treated like ordinary high school students. That's why, in order to prevent my younger sister and I from walking down the same path, I learned that, in order to earn enough remuneration through labor. But it was also because of this that I met Xueqi and lived such a good life now. Looking at her younger sister's expression, Daliana chuckled. That was all in the past. Now, she had almost forgotten about the hellish life she had led. But a while ago, I went to peek at Xueqi doing that, and realized that something was amiss. The pain and numbness in the past couldn't be seen on the faces of Xueqi and, his opponents. Instead, they seemed to be enjoying it. This made me a little confused. Why is there such a huge difference when it's the same thing? Speaking until here, Daliana couldn't help but raise her head and look at Penelope. In fact, this doubt had appeared in her heart for a long time. They had peeked at Xueqi more than once. Xueqi and Ai Xiaoxi, Xueqi and Feng Yunchen, Xueqi, Feng Yunchen and Ai Xiaoxi, and even Xueqi and Afra that night. But the more they peeked at him, the stranger they felt. This doubt had always existed in their hearts. After all, no one taught them this kind of lesson. They wanted to ask because SH20 Clive was the best teacher. But they also knew that there was something between SH20 Clive and Xueqi that couldn't be explained clearly. They still wanted SH20 Clive to be their mother. If they said that, then this matter would probably be ruined. As for Feng Yunchen, Afra, and Ai Xiaoxi, they were a little embarrassed. After all, they were the ones who peeked at them. Daliana and the others also didn't know what to say. After all, they were very clear about the thoughts of these women. They couldn't wait to strip themselves naked and send themselves to Xueqi's bed. As for the others, they were Xueqi's subordinates, so they didn't dare to ask. That's why they held back for so long. After coming here, they met an outsider, Penelope. This is indeed hard to say. But what you saw before should be those bad guys who forced the girls to do it. They didn't have any feelings for each other and didn't have any foreshadowing. Therefore they might feel a lot of pain in their hearts. But in order to live, they could only accept such things. As for the Xueqi you saw later, they should be willing to do it. Both of them were in love with each other and had mutual respect for each other. Therefore when they did it, they felt comfortable. It's like learning. If you are willing to learn, then you will naturally learn very smoothly and quickly. But if you are not willing to learn, then learning will be very difficult. You will feel like a day is like a year. Hearing Dalina's words, Penelope's face couldn't help but turn red. But she also knew that someone should teach them this matter, so that they wouldn't be hurt in the future. If that happened, it would be too late. So although she was a little shy, she still said slowly. It's just that the example she gave later, it's a matter of opinion. In fact, Penelope herself was also an exception, because she also didn't experience it. In the United States, 80% of girls will lose their thing before entering college. Among the remaining 20%, more than 15% will lose their thing because of their family's religion. For example, they believe in Catholicism. More strict families naturally won't allow this. Among the remaining 5%, 40% is because they are too ugly, and the remaining 1% is Penelope. Both of them are in love with each other? Just like us and Xueqi? Hearing Penelope's words, Marian interrupted and asked at this time. You are not, you are father and daughter. But hearing Marian's words, Penelope immediately shook her head. But we don't treat him as a father. He is not much older than us. Hearing her words, Daliana also said immediately. Looking at the two of them with golden eyes, Penelope couldn't help but shake her head. It seems, it's going to be bad. You don't treat him as a father, but he treats you as his daughter. Don't make a fuss. You are just a combination of gratitude and worship. That's not love. After thinking about it, in order to avoid a possible tragedy, Penelope said seriously. She didn't know why, but when Daliana and Marian said that they liked Zhang Hai, she was a little anxious. Really? Hearing Penelope's words, Daliana and Marian looked at each other. They were also a little confused. But in their hearts, they made a decision at the same time. Although they don't know whether their feelings for Zhang Hai are a combination of worship and gratitude, they want to see if Zhang Hai really feels like a daughter to them, like Penelope said. Achoo! At this time, Zhang Hai, who was eating Yangtze River grenadier fish, suddenly sneezed, and then pinched his nose in confusion. Achoo! At this time, Zhang Hai, who was eating Yangtze River grenadier fish, suddenly sneezed, and then pinched his nose in confusion. Have you caught a cold? Watching Zhang Hai, Qili, who was sitting beside him, couldn't help but ask in a low voice. To be honest, Qili was very happy at this banquet. Because Zhang Hai was sitting beside her, nobody dared to glance at her like a wolf like before, nobody dared to talk about her behind her back, not to mention find her trouble. How comfortable it was to have a man to rely on. Pitifully, she didn't know that before. Now that she thought about it, she was really too silly at that time. Now that she heard Zhang Hai sneeze, she asked anxiously as if a small cold was a serious illness. At this moment, she began to imagine Zhang Hai falling sick and lying on the bed. She would take care of him, wipe the juice on him, feed him medicine, and warm him up if he was too cold. Of course, it wouldn't be a normal warmth, but two people. Hee. No. But it was a pity that Zhang Hai wouldn't let her take care of him because he wouldn't fall sick at all. How could they fall sick when they were both at the limit of their bodies? Therefore, he was just a little confused. Why did he sneeze? Sir, did you add too much pepper? At this moment, the chef in front of him was stunned for a moment before asking. It's okay, this is the best flavor. Hearing the chef's words, Zhang Hai suddenly realized that it might be because of this. Chapter 439. What a shameless couple. Looking at Zhang Hai and Qili in the distance, and Zhang Wu, who was sitting in the corner, gritted his teeth with hatred. Originally, they were giving out business cards and preparing to get to know these people, so they didn't have much time and leisure to deal with Zhang Hai. However, when he finished giving out business cards, these people didn't want to take the Yin family to have fun. They had nothing to do and were reluctant to leave. At this time, they could only turn their attention to other things. There were only 3 highlights of this banquet. First, food, drink, and social interaction. For example, the Yin family didn't lack food and drink, but no one was willing to take them to have fun. They couldn't stick to them, because it would be annoying, so Zhang Wu could only turn his attention to other places. As soon as he turned his attention, he saw Zhang Hai and Qili. At this time, the two were sitting in front of teppanyaki and eating happily. Zhang Hai liked to eat Yangtze River grenadier fish very much, because this fish tasted really good, but there was a problem. This fish had too many bones. If it was roasted too crispy, it would lose the taste of fish, and the loss would outweigh the gain. If it wasn't roasted too crispy, although it had the taste of fish, there would be too many bones. Maybe they could tell that Zhang Hai liked to eat it. On this side, Qili had been sitting beside Zhang Hai, picking out the bones on the fish for Zhang Hai. She picked out the bones one by one, even if they were burrs. After picking out the meat, she gave it to Zhang Hai to eat. Looking at Qili's virtuous appearance, and Zhang Wu really hated her. He felt that his teeth were itching, and he felt that his face was turning green. And Zhang Wu really liked Qili. Even now the relationship between the two families had reached this point, he still liked Qili very much. After the Qili family's accident, he was really sad and decadent for more than a year. He didn't come out until Zhang Yong asked him to. After being rejected by Qili again and again, he thought that he would forget her, but he found that he couldn't. Even when he went out to have fun, he had to find a woman who looked like Qili. Compared to him and Zhang Hai, his heart was now even more sour. When he was with Qili, he really treated Qili like a queen. When Lu Li ate melon seeds, he had to use his fingers to pull them out because Qili, who used his teeth, found it dirty. When he ate crab with Qili, he had to take out all the meat himself, and the appearance of the crab had to be kept intact. Otherwise, Chili wouldn't eat it. He was the one who picked out the bones when eating fish, and he was the one who carried the bags when going out. Even if she cooked at home, he still had to do the cooking, tidy up, and wash the dishes. In his world, Chili was a queen. She was an emperor, and he had to serve her well. Even so, the two of them eventually developed to the point where they could hold hands when going out on the street. That was all. But now what did he see? Chili carried her bag by herself, and Chili picked out the fish for Zhang Hai. She took the initiative to carry the food for Zhang Hai. She even cleaned up the leftovers of Zhang Hai's food. Even so, she took the initiative to stick to Zhang Hai and brazenly let Zhang Hai have a mistress. Was this still the Chili he knew? Was Chili crazy? The more he looked, the more he thought, the angrier he became. Why? Why did the woman he loved the most turn into the woman he desired the most in someone else's arms? Now, from the inside to the outside, she was the woman who would only appear in his dreams. But now, this woman had nothing to do with him. Oh no, it was not that she had nothing to do with him. She was his enemy. He wanted to stab his enemy to death. It was not hatred born from love, but pure hatred. There was nothing else mixed in. At a certain moment, Zhanghu's heart tightened for no reason, and then he felt a sharp pain. Bang! Carelessly, Zhangwu knocked over a plate next to him. The sound of the plate shattering attracted the attention of the people around him. However, when they saw that Zhangwu's face was ashen and his body was sweating, they were all stunned. Zhangwu, how is Zhangwu? Seeing this, Zhangyong and Ndushuan rushed over first. Looking at their son and brother, the two of them were a little anxious. They patted his face and asked in a low voice. It should be an acute heart attack. Let's go to the hospital first. At this time, the doctor in charge of the villa also rushed over. After giving Zhangwu 2 tablets of nitroglycerin, he immediately said to Zhangyong and Zhangshuan in front of him, "Let's go." Although he was a little reluctant to leave the banquet, his son's life was more valuable. So after Zhangwu sighed, he smiled at the people around him. The two of them carried Zhangwu, who could no longer speak, out of the villa. When Zhangwu walked out of the villa, Zhang Hai and Chili also noticed the movement there. They should not be able to see the sun tomorrow. Although she did not know how Zhang Hai arranged it, with her understanding of Zhang Hai, Chili knew that Zhang Hai would definitely make a move. She could not help but whisper, "What? Are you distressed? If you are distressed, you can stop them now, and they will not die." Hearing Chili's words, Zhang Hai said indifferently while eating fish. Of course, these words were a little harsh. "What are you talking about? Really, I'm distressed for my dad. I'm distressed that he didn't see them die with his own eyes." Turning her head and rolling her eyes at Zhang Hai, Chili said hatefully while cleaning up the fish. The trace of pity in her original words had long disappeared. Hearing her words, Zhang Hai also shrugged. For these people, directly killing them was the easiest thing to do. Watching these 3 people leave, Azalina, who had been hiding in the villa, also unknowingly left. 5 minutes later, the taxi under the surveillance in the distance finally had a tow truck, and the chubby driver also came over. After negotiating with the tow truck driver for a while, the tow truck was towed away. On the other side, Zhangwu, Zhangyong, and Zhangshuan also got in their own car. After they gave the order, Zhang Rue, who actually came tonight, started the engine. In fact, to be honest, after they learned that Zhang Hai had returned, they were also afraid that Zhang Hai would fight to the death. In case Zhang Hai wanted to deal with them, Zhang Rue, a former mercenary, could help them. However, if Zhang Hai didn't want to make a move in the villa, then there was no need to use Zhang Rue. Therefore, Zhang Rue only played the role of a driver today. If Zhang Hai knew that he could eliminate 4 of his enemies today, he would really laugh in his dreams. After starting the engine, the car slowly drove away from the villa's parking lot and rushed in the direction of the city. "Dad, why don't you go back? This kind of opportunity is very rare." Clutching his chest, Zhangwu, who felt a little better, looked at Zhangshuan sitting next to him, hesitated for a moment, and whispered, "What nonsense are you talking about? How long can your dad live? This company will belong to you 2 brothers sooner or later. For me, you 2 are the most important. Don't talk. Wait until we get checked out in the hospital." Hearing Zhangwu's words, Zhangshuan glanced at him, then showed a slightly gratified smile on his face, and said to Njongwu. Listening to his father's words, Njongwu couldn't help but raise his head. This meant that he didn't want to let his tears fall. He suddenly felt that he was so stupid. For a woman who had a change of heart, he was so sad. But now he understood that in the future, he was only Njongwu, and Qili was only his enemy. He would definitely make Qili and Jianghai regret it. But unfortunately, he might not be able to see that day. The car was driving faster and faster, and the distance between them and the city was getting shorter and shorter, but they didn't notice that the water temperature seemed to be a little wrong. At this moment, a thin layer of something similar to a sugar coating in the water tank was gradually melting under the gradually hot water. When the water melted this layer of sugar coating, the cesium in the sugar coating also came into contact with the water. Bang! With a loud sound, the cesium and the water came into contact, and at the same time, hydrogen was produced, and it exploded. After hearing a loud noise, thick smoke instantly came out from the front cover of the car. The entire car was no longer under control at this time. Among the 4 people in the car, Njongxuan, Njongwu, and Njong were all stunned. He immediately grabbed the armrest next to him, and Njongwu's face seemed to be even more ugly. But fortunately, Jiang Rue was here at this time. Although Jiang Rue had no way to stop the car, after all, the brakes had failed, he still controlled the car to crash into the strongest section of the barrier next to him. This meant that he wanted to forcibly stop the car. Only a bang sound was heard, and the car hit the barrier heavily. After all, this car was also a car that cost hundreds of thousands. After hitting the car, the airbag would naturally pop out. Instead, it was a ball of flame. It didn't give Jiang Rue any time to react at all. The flame had already engulfed the 4 people in the car with an incomparable momentum in an instant. At this moment, Jiang Hai's phone also vibrated. He saw that an unfamiliar number had sent him a photo. The photo was of the car that caught fire. After deleting the photo, Jiang Hai put the phone back into his pocket. His originally gloomy face also became better at this time. The matter that had been tormenting him for so long was finally solved. When the fire truck and the police arrived, there were only 4 charred bodies left in the car. As for the reason why the car lost control and caught fire, the preliminary judgment was that the water temperature was too high, so the car overheated. At the same time, it caused the brakes to fail and hit the barrier. Because the car's internal combustion engine leaked out, it caused the fire, which caused the car to catch fire. However, logically speaking, even if the car caught fire, there should be about a buffer of about 10 minutes. But why didn't the 4 people in the car escape during this time? This made the police very puzzled. Chapter 440. According to the latest news received by this station, at about 22:13 last night, a Ford sedan was driving at the entrance to the city. When the water temperature passed the threshold, the brakes failed, causing a car accident and causing the car to spontaneously combust. All 4 people in the car were killed. The relevant departments remind everyone who is driving to check the data of the car before driving. Don't be in a hurry to drive and repeat the same mistake. Jiang Hai chuckled as he watched the news broadcasters from the Yuehun tribe report on the TV. This thing was not something that could be solved by careful inspection. However, it did not matter. As long as these guys were dealt with, Jiang Hai's mood would be much better. It seemed that accepting Azalina was really something to be happy about. After returning last night, Jiang Hai washed up and went to bed. However, he did not know that the imperial capital was in turmoil at this time. However, the shock subsided in the morning. When he got up and turned on the TV in the morning, he saw this news. 3 people from the Andersons all died last night. Now the Andersons are in a mess. Several major directors, as well as Anderson's wife, nephew, and niece, are all fighting for control of the Andersons. Our Qili group has also eaten up a lot of their family property in one go. Are you interested in taking a share? Pushing open the door, Qili walked in excitedly. In this world, there were only 3 things that could make her happy. The first was Jiang Hai, the second was attacking the Andersons, and the third was making money by doing business. Now that Jiang Hai helped her attack the Andersons to make money, these 3 things were put together. She could not be unhappy. Forget about me. Do you think the people in the imperial court are stupid? Someone must have contacted them. This matter may have something to do with me. Although there is no specific evidence, if I go too far, wouldn't it be like confessing without being pressed? Hearing Qi Li's words, Zhang Hai shook his head. He did not have the intention to buy domestic shares or anything. There was no way to manage it, and it would be easy to attract hatred. This was also the reason why, even if he had so much money in the United States, he did not invest in the financial industry. Firstly, it was too dangerous. Secondly, it was too high profile. He preferred to make a fortune in silence. The rest had nothing to do with him. That's true. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Qi Li, who was originally a little tempted, couldn't help but calm down. She knew even less than Zhang Hai what the imperial court was like and how powerful it was. Now, the imperial court had chosen to cover up this matter. If she and Zhang Hai didn't know when to back off, the imperial court would fall out with them in the end. It was fine for Zhang Hai. After all, his foundation was abroad, but the Qi enterprise would definitely suffer. Thinking of this, Qi Li called back to the company and asked the people in the company to be more reserved. If anything happened, the company should not be implicated. Is there anywhere you want to go today? Now that we have solved the problem on our minds, we can have fun. Looking at Zhang Hai, Qi Li sat next to Zhang Hai and deliberately sat very close to him. If it weren't for the fear of scaring Zhang Hai, she would have directly sat in Zhang Hai's arms. After this incident, her feelings for Zhang Hai became deeper and deeper. Women admired those who could make them feel powerful. Zhang Hai was like this. Zhang Hai could raise cows and earn more than $1 billion a year. Zhang Hai's fighting ability could subdue mountain lions. Zhang Hai's subordinates could take care of the family. In Qi Li's eyes, how could she have been so blind to not see Zhang Hai's shining point? How could she have pushed away a man who could make money, have a strong body, and give people the greatest sense of security? Thinking of this, Qi Li really felt that she was really blinded by hatred. She didn't catch such a good man. Now, if she wanted to catch him again, it seemed that there were many enemies. Play? I really don't know. Hearing her words, Zhang Hai was stunned for a moment, then he touched his chin and said. Zhang Hai was telling the truth. He really didn't know what to play. In fact, almost all the tourist cities in China were like this. There were some scenic spots that people didn't want to go a second time after they had been there, such as the imperial capital. If it weren't for accompanying others, Zhang Hai wouldn't have wanted to go to places like the Forbidden City, the Temple of Heaven, and the like. After all, he was just a tourist, not a person who studied these things, so he wasn't so crazy about these things. You have been to the Forbidden City, the Temple of Heaven, the Bird's Nest, and the Ihi Garden and the Old Summer Palace, and the Great Wall. You don't want to go shopping, so where should we go? Hearing that Zhang Hai didn't know where to go, Qi Li also sat there and thought about it. But to be honest, Qi Li had lived in the imperial capital for many years. But she really didn't know what to play in the imperial capital, because when she was young, she basically went to the park and was very happy to go to the amusement park. Later, when she was in university, she didn't stay in China. Less than a year after she came back from university, something happened to her family. Then she worked crazily until now. Now that she had her revenge, and with Zhang Hai accompanying her, she wanted to relax and play with Zhang Hai. But the problem was that she didn't know where to play, because she had been to the places that Zhang Hai had been to, and she had also been to the places that Zhang Hai hadn't been to. She naturally hadn't been to the places that Zhang Hai hadn't been to. Why don't we ask Feng Yunchen? This guy should be very familiar with the imperial capital. After thinking for a long time, Qi Li still couldn't figure out where to go to play. She hesitated for a moment. Then she said to Zhang Hai. Her. Although Zhang Hai was a dull person, he wasn't stupid. He could see that Qi Li was interested in him, and he and Feng Yunchen, well, speaking of this relationship, there was also some entanglement. Originally, if Qi Li wasn't here today, then Zhang Hai might call her, but now that Qi Li was here, Zhang Hai was a little overwhelmed, not to mention that it was proposed by Qi Li. What? Are you done playing with her? Seeing Zhang Hai's slightly awkward expression, Qi Li was still very gratified. At least this proved that Zhang Hai cared about her thoughts, but now what she wanted to do most was to please Zhang Hai, and other things didn't matter for the time being. Because she knew that although Feng Yunchen and Zhang Hai had such a relationship, she couldn't become Zhang Hai's wife. Having such an informant was not a bad thing for Qi Li. AI? What are you talking about? Hearing Qi Li's words, Zhang Hai was even more embarrassed. If you aren't tired, then sit and wait. Seeing Zhang Hai's awkward look, Qili laughed, picked up the phone, and dialed a number on it. After a few rings, the phone was picked up. Hello, Feng Yunchen. Zhang Hai is now in the hotel's XX building, XX suite. I'll give you half an hour to dress up, or we'll go out and play. We won't wait for you. Listening to Feng Yunchen on the other side of the phone, Qili on the other side was already talking like a machine gun. Then, without waiting for Feng Yunchen to answer, she directly hung up the phone. Just after Qili hung up the phone, Feng Yunchen and AI Xiaoxi, who were driving to work at this time, instantly turned the steering wheel and rushed directly to the hotel. They ran 3 red lights along the way. Not to mention half an hour, it didn't even take 20 minutes. Zhang Hai's doorbell had already rung. When he opened the door, Zhang Hai saw the figures of Feng Yunchen and AI Xiaoxi. Looking at the 2 beautiful women in front of him, and the 2 beautiful women also looked at the embarrassed Zhang Hai in front of them. The anger in their eyes was even more intense. Seeing this scene, Zhang Hai was even more embarrassed. You bastard, you didn't even call us when you returned to China. Who do you think we are? The 2 women looked at Zhang Hai. AI Xiaoxi just felt a little sad. She felt that she seemed to have a relatively low position in Zhang Hai's heart. He didn't call her when he returned to China, and Feng Yunchen directly yelled, pointing at Zhang Hai and shouting. Let's talk about it inside the house. Hearing her words, Zhang Hai was so embarrassed that his cancer was about to act up. What was this? No, we still have to go to work after scolding you. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Feng Yunchen on the other side also shouted loudly. Hey, you guys come back first. It's not what you think, otherwise, I wouldn't have called you. Hearing her words, Zhang Hai didn't know what to say, but Qili stood up at this time and said to the 2 women in front of her. Hearing Qili's words, Feng Yunchen and AI Xiaoxi also glanced at Zhang Hai and then walked in. But when they went in, they didn't sit down, but stood at the door and looked at Zhang Hai coldly. Don't be so bitter and hateful. Zhang Hai didn't call you for your own good. After all, Zhang Hai's return this time is very dangerous. Looking at the 2 of them, to be honest, Qili couldn't help but be happy. Feng Yunchen and AI Xiaoxi were taking advantage of this opportunity to break up with Zhang Hai. However, she also knew that this was impossible. So sometimes, it was better to say it herself than Zhang Hai saying it to them in the future. Therefore she opened her mouth first. Then Qili roughly talked about the purpose of Zhang Hai's return this time. After listening to Qili's words, Feng Yunchen and AI Xiaoxi didn't relax, but walked directly to Zhang Hai and looked at Zhang Hai angrily. You didn't even tell us such a big thing. If something happened to you, do you want us to live as widows? Feng Yunchen pinched Zhang Hai fiercely, and said to Zhang Hai with a face full of anger. The fierce character of a northeastern girl is not ordinary. And AI Xiaoxi is not bad. Not only did she pinch Zhang Hai, but she also deliberately glanced at Zhang Hai. This guy really doesn't know how to cherish himself. But after pinching, she carefully looked at Zhang Hai, fearing that he would be hurt. Okay, don't be mushy. You don't take me seriously. Don't worry, your Zhang Hai is fine. Everything was done by his subordinates. Looking at the appearance of these 2, Qili said angrily. Subordinates? Belle Lester? Hearing Qili's words, Feng Yunchen couldn't help but ask with some doubts. Hey boss, where are we going to play today? But at this moment, the door was opened again, and Azalina walked in excitedly, and when she saw Feng Yunchen and AI Xiaoxi, the 3 of them couldn't help but be stunned. Chapter 441. The Imperial Capital. There are a lot of places to play, but there are not many that you are interested in. Sitting on the sofa in Zhang Hai's suite, Feng Yunchen looked at Zhang Hai and said seriously because she had just mentioned a lot of places, but they were all rejected by Zhang Hai. In fact, the Imperial Capital was a large city in China. Not only were there scenic spots, but there were also many places to play. In addition to the scenic spots such as the Forbidden City, the Great Wall, the Old Summer Palace, and the Bird's Nest, there were actually many places to play. For example, Happy Valley could be played, Dongdan, Shidon, and Wang's Mansion could be shopped. There were many aquariums, zoos, and various parks in the Imperial Capital, such as Hohai, Xueqi, Xiangshan, and a series of other scenic spots. They were all very good, but unfortunately, Jiang Hai was not willing to go. When it came to shopping, how could the imperial capital be cheaper and better than New York? He couldn't see the aquariums and zoos in the United States. What's more, the species of animals in his manor may not be less than those in zoos. The coral reef in the aquarium was enough to beat any aquarium in the country. Even if it was any aquarium in the world, Jiang Hai would not be afraid. So after talking for a long time, Jiang Hai was not willing to go to these places to play. As for the 30-mile village that Feng Yunchen mentioned, Jiang Hai didn't even have the slightest interest in it. The place he hated the most was nightclubs. What's more, it was daytime now, so after talking for a while, Feng Yunchen was a little speechless because it seemed that Jiang Hai didn't like anything. Then, Jiang Hai, what are you interested in? Go to the place you are interested in. Just as Feng Yunchen was worried, AI Xueqi couldn't help but interrupt, but after listening to her words, the other people in the room looked at her strangely. This made her wonder. Why are they looking at me like this? Did I say something wrong? You have been with him for a while. Don't you know that this guy is only interested in eating? Glancing at AI Xueqi, Feng Yunchen took the initiative to speak. Hearing Feng Yunchen's words, Jiang Hai also laughed. Indeed, he was a person who did not care much about other things. The thing he cared about the most in his life was eating. But there really isn't anything good to eat in the capital. AI Xueqi muttered softly as she curled her lips. Indeed, although the imperial capital was called the imperial capital, there really wasn't much specialty food. Speaking of the imperial capital, other than pastries, the two most delicious things were the imperial capital roast duck and the hot pot. But when it came to authentic instant boiled mutton, it had to be Meng Nei. Roast duck was too greasy and couldn't be eaten in the morning. Moreover, Jiang Hai and the others had already eaten it. It was indeed not suitable to eat too much of it. Other than that, there were all kinds of small pastries. What? There were also some specialty food. Ugh, although Jiang Hai liked to eat the specialty food of the imperial capital, to be honest, he personally was not used to eating it. For example, he couldn't eat braised food. Soy milk was even worse. He didn't like to eat fried liver. The same was true for Jiaochuan. He didn't eat fried chicken ****, sesame tofu, so except for some pastries that could be bought all over the world, such as rolling donkey and sakima, the imperial capital was really not a place to eat delicious food in his eyes. Of course, in the future, Jiang Hai would understand that Huaxia was indeed a world of food, but most of the cuisines belonged to the local region. The things that were delicious for the locals were really not used to eating when foreigners came. For example, Jiangsu and Zhejiang cuisines, Shanghai cuisines, Cantonese cuisines. According to Jiang Hai's taste, he was more used to eating Shandong, Sichuan, and Hunan cuisines. However, among these three cuisines, those who couldn't eat salty food couldn't eat Shandong cuisine, those who couldn't eat spicy food couldn't eat Sichuan cuisine, and those who couldn't eat pure spicy food couldn't eat Hunan cuisine. Therefore, the difference was really big. Now in the imperial capital, Jiang Hai and the others didn't know what to eat. Of course, they didn't know where to go to play. For a while, they just sat in the room awkwardly. Bang, bang, bang. Just as Jiang Hai and the others were watching TV awkwardly and thinking about where to go to play, there was a knock on the door. Jiang Hai opened the door and saw that the person outside was none other than Minister Qin. As soon as he saw Minister Qin, Jiang Hai was stunned for a moment, but Minister Qin laughed. Brother Jiang, thank you so much for last night. If it weren't for you, the imperial court might have been in trouble this time. I still have to say that you helped. Today, I told the imperial court about this matter, and the imperial court sent someone over to talk about it. Mr. Du Feimin has already agreed. We're talking now. As soon as he saw Jiang Hai, Minister Qin laughed and said. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also laughed. How was this his idea? It was Du Feimin's intention to sell it. However, he lacked an excuse, and Jiang Hai was the most important excuse. However, for this reason, he also extorted 600 million yuan of oil futures from Du Feimin. Of course, he wanted more than this. This time, after plundering in Huaxia, he planned to go to South America and the Caribbean. Those sunken ships would rust if they stayed under the sea, so he might as well give them to himself. As long as everything is going well, come in and sit down. Hearing his words, Zhang Hai naturally didn't say much. He chuckled and motioned for Minister Qin to come in and sit down. However, when Minister Qin saw the room full of women, he was a little surprised. He really didn't expect that Zhang Hai's usual style would be so open. How long did he delay? So many people, brother. Is there anything you need? If there's something, I'll take my leave first. Let's talk when we have time. Looking at the people in the room, Minister Qin smiled at Zhang Hai and then said to him, "Oh, there's nothing to do now. Originally, we wanted to go out today, but we didn't know where to go. I've visited all the scenic spots. Minister Qin also knows that I'm in Boston in the United States, which is very close to New York, so I don't want to go to the shopping malls in China. I'm not interested in the zoo, parks, amusement parks, and so on. I feel that nightclubs are very noisy and I don't like them, so now I'm a little hesitant and don't know where to go." Hearing Minister Qin's words, Zhang Hai shook his head and said with a smile. He was telling the truth, because he really didn't know where to go. "Oh, then what are you interested in?" Upon hearing Zhang Hai's words, Minister Qin couldn't help but frown. According to what Zhang Hai said, there really wasn't any place to play. Eating. Looking at Minister Qin, Zhang Hai said his hobby with a little embarrassment. "Eating? Haha, eating is good, but it's not the time to eat now. How about this? I'll be the host today. I'll treat you and your sisters-in-law. At noon, we'll go to the Tan family's cuisine, and at night, we'll go to the Li family's cuisine. As for the place to go, how about we go to the Pan Garden now? In the afternoon. I remember that you like those ingredients, right? I have a place that you'll definitely be satisfied with." However, Minister Qin came prepared after all. After hearing Zhang Hai's request, he hesitated for a moment and said directly. Hearing the words sisters-in-law, except for Qi Li, Ai Xiaoxi, and Feng Yunchen, everyone else had some strange expressions on their faces. Azalina didn't care, but Daliana and Marian were very interested. As for Penelope, she was only shy. Now she had no other choice but to pretend that she didn't understand. Tan family's cuisine? Li family's cuisine? Pan Garden? After hearing these three nouns, Zhang Hai temporarily forgot to explain this matter, because for a foodie, the first two nouns are too important. He was stunned for a moment, then patted his head. How could he forget these restaurants? Tan family's cuisine and Li family's cuisine are famous official dishes. It is not an exaggeration to say that they imitate the imperial cuisine. For a foodie, the three major private cuisines of Hua Xia, Tan family's cuisine, Li family's cuisine, and Kong family's cuisine, are the pinnacle of the culinary world. The most famous one is Kong family's cuisine, but that is in Lu province. Both of these restaurants are in the capital. It would be a pity if he didn't try them in the capital. Why didn't Zhang Hai think of this before? Another place is Pan Garden. Zhang Hai has also heard of it. Of course, he mainly heard about it from movies and TV series. Pan Garden used to be called the Antique Market. It was also the largest antique trading market in the capital. Of course, now there are definitely many fake goods there. Most of them are modern imitations. However, if you don't have the intention of finding treasures, but just going there for a stroll, it is a good place to go. Zhang Hai is not interested in antiques, and so on. But it doesn't matter if you go there. Seeing that Zhang Hai is quite interested, everyone in the room can't help but shrug their shoulders. They just talked about it, but Zhang Hai is not interested. Indeed, it seems that the places that men want to go are indeed not the same as the places that women want to go. However, since Zhang Hai has already decided where he wants to go, they will not stop him. Just like that, everyone has decided on today's itinerary. The people going are Zhang Hai, Minister Qin, Daliana, Marian, Penelope, Azalina, Qi Li, Ai Xiaoxi, and Feng Yunchen. There are a total of 9 people. The car definitely can't fit all of them. Fortunately, Minister Qin was very helpful. After a phone call, a brand new Nissan and a driver arrived in less than 10 minutes. After they got in the car, Minister Qin ordered everyone to leave first and head to the Panjiayuan Old Goods Market. Looking at Minister Qin sitting in front, Zhang Hai's face showed a smile, but he muttered to himself in his heart. This Minister Qin asked me to come today. It's definitely not as simple as just treating me to a meal. After all, this guy is the deputy minister of a top department. Although he is just a deputy, he is not so free as to ask me to make fun of me. However, according to what he said, Du Feimin's side is progressing very well. Why is he looking for me? Although he is a little curious, Zhang Hai decided not to ask anymore. There will be a way when the car gets to the mountain, and the boat will cross the bridge when it gets there. Today I have to play and eat. There will be a time when he can't hold it in anymore. When he wants to say it, I'll wait and see. P.S. After looking at the book review section, Xiao Fei chuckled. Xiao Fei originally didn't want to write about the country, because there are too many people with fragile hearts. They can't make any jokes. Therefore, when writing about the country, it will inevitably involve some problems with the differences between different places. In the eyes of these people, it is blatant discrimination. You are looking down on the people of that place. Xiao Fei can't say anything about this. Who can control fragile hearts? He likes to think this way. I can't do anything about it. As for writing about other countries, to be honest, there are also people who criticize Xiao Fei for not being patriotic. Xiao Fei has seen all of these before. Some people don't even read the book. They only criticize in the book review section. What can Xiao Fei say? Xiao Fei, who criticizes them, is as uneducated as them? Therefore, Xiao Fei can only ignore them. He will write what he wants to write and post what he wants to post. He can't let them disrupt Xiao Fei's original steps. However, after this section, Xiao Fei tried his best not to write about the country. In this world, there are too many people with fragile hearts and people who stand on the moral high ground. The above is free. Chapter 442. Panjiayuan Old Goods Market. This place was quite famous, whether in novels or in movies and TV series. Generally, people who wanted to find good treasures would come here. It was also the place where a lot of male protagonists in treasure appraisal novels rose to prominence. There was a time when Zhang Hai also liked to read treasure appraisal novels, but later on, some of them were overwritten, so they were mostly the same. Moreover, some people who wrote this kind of novel knew a lot, but there were many people who just followed the trend. They didn't have too much knowledge, so it seemed that sometimes they didn't know as much as the readers. However, it was also because of this that Zhang Hai had a rough idea of how to appraise some antiques. Of course, he only had a rough idea. He could fool people who didn't know anything, but he was far from being an expert. He didn't know anything about the type, dynasty, or color. The only thing he knew was carbon-14, but there was no way to test it. With carbon-14's current age, it couldn't be determined within a few hundred years. Unless he directly took out a bronze from the Shang and Zhou dynasties, he could determine whether it was real or fake. The current mainstream was artifacts from the Ming and Qing dynasties, so it was difficult to determine whether they were real or fake. This could only be done by guessing. Of course, Zhang Hai was just there to shop. He didn't intend to buy these things. Zhang Hai never believed in luck, so he never gambled, nor did he buy lottery tickets. Well, he had bought lottery tickets before, but the most he won was 5 yuan. Buying antiques, buying the lowest price, and so on, he naturally didn't believe in it. Panjiayuan was located on the East Third Ring Road of the imperial capital, so it wasn't very far. If there was no traffic jam, it would take 10 minutes to get there by car. During these 10 minutes, Minister Qin had been telling Zhang Hai the story of this place. In the past, it wasn't called an old goods market, but an antique market. However, the current imperial court had a clear rule about antiques. What was yours was the imperial courts, and what was the imperial courts was still the imperial courts. As long as it was a civilian antique, no one was allowed to buy or sell it privately, no matter if it was a national treasure or not. Because of this, people came here every day to check. Later, perhaps the owner couldn't stand it anymore, so he changed the name to Old Goods Market. You couldn't check a old goods market, right? Old things and second-hand furniture. I can sell them for as much as I want. It has nothing to do with anyone else. As a result, it gradually became a famous antique street, also known as the Street of Liars. The entire Pan Garden covered an area of 48,600 square meters. Of course, it was much smaller than Zhang Hai's manor. It was divided into stalls, ancient buildings, classical furniture, modern collections, stone carvings, and some restaurants. In the past, this might have been a place to trade antiques, but now it had become a scenic spot. There's nothing good sold here now. You can go in and take a look, but it depends on your mood to buy. But it's best if you don't spend more than 100 yuan. After all, our money doesn't grow on trees. We have to be careful. Looking at Zhang Hai and the others, Department Head Qin introduced them with a smile. Indeed, according to what he said. How could a pie fall from the sky so easily? 99% of the things here are fake. If you just like a decoration and play with it, it's not bad, but if you really spend a lot of money and believe it, then it's a big loss. You said that there's no real thing here now. If you want to buy real things, when do you have to come? Hearing Minister Qin's words, Feng Yunchen was also very interested. After all, in her eyes, money is still very important. If she can buy something good with it, it would be great. So after hesitating for a moment, she asked Minister Qin. This pan garden, there's no real goods from Monday to Sunday. The real things are sold in the shop, and the price is also very high. If you want to buy something, the only chance is every Saturday and Sunday morning, when the sun just comes out, that is, around 4 o'clock in the morning. At that time, this is called the ghost market. At that time there may be some good things. Hearing Feng Yunchen's words, Minister Qin also said with a smile, and when Zhang Hai heard his words, he couldn't help but think of the origin of this ghost market. According to legend, the origin of this ghost market was during the Manchurian Tatar period. At that time, the people in the imperial capital were more or less particular about appearance. When they met, they called each other lord, and no one was afraid of each other. However, there will always be a time when the family can't survive, so at that time, some people with wealth will sell some of the things in the family, which are some antiques and the like. They are afraid that others will see it, so they cover their faces and come to sell it very early in the morning. No one knows who the buyer and seller are, so it's called the ghost market. Of course, there is another saying, that is, at the end of the years, some Wangye people in the imperial palace stole things and sold them here. Naturally, they don't want others to know that they are the ones who sold it. So speaking of it, this is also a kind of culture in the imperial capital. But for the people in the imperial capital, buying things is still at that time. Of course, Zhang Hai and the others are just going to stroll around now. After parking the car, Minister Qin led Zhang Hai and the others into the Pan Garden Old Goods Market. As soon as they walked in, they found that there are really a lot of people here. In addition to a large number of foreigners, there are also many groups of tourists and local young people. After walking in, Zhang Hai found that there were some shops and stalls here. They were really full of dazzling things. Of course, the things outside are more or less some handicrafts, which are not worth much. The really valuable things can only be seen inside. There are Buddha statues, porcelain, bronze, bracelets, Buddhist beads, sky eyes, and so on. Everything is here. As soon as they walked in, Zhang Hai felt his eyes light up. The things here are really complete. In fact, you can buy everything you want here. Seeing Zhang Hai's surprised look, Minister Qin walked over with a smile and said to Zhang Hai. Hearing his words, Zhang Hai nodded. Indeed, the things here are very complete. Out of the parking lot, first is the classical hall, then the modern collection hall, then the first area, the second area, the third area, and the fourth area. The things sold in each area are different. Of course, the most popular place is naturally the open-air street market, which is the place with the most people. Of course, the place that Minister Qin said not to spend more than 100 yuan to buy small things is also here. If it is in those shops, how can there be anything less than 100 yuan? Of course, Zhang Hai and the others are more than just going to take a look. After walking around for a while, everyone bought something. Of course, they were all small toys. For example, Delina, Marion, and the others liked some commemorative medals of their ancestors the most. These things are not expensive, and they are very Huaxia style. They bought a lot of them and are going to give them to the people in the manor when they go back. As for Qi Li and the others, they prefer to buy small bracelets. Although they are all fake, they buy them for fun. The most important thing is that the authenticity of the bracelet is not the thing, but the person wearing it is actually the most important thing. For example, if Qi Li wears a gold-plated bracelet, how can people think that it is gold-plated? Their net worth was there for all to see. Even if it was fake, it was real. Hence, they were only buying things for fun. For example, turquoise, obsidian, and so on. Penelope is a lawyer. To be honest, she has no interest in these things. Because she is too rational, She doesn't buy anything. Azalina came to Huaxia when she was doing a mission before, so she knows that these things are meaningless. Moreover, she has no interest in these things, so she doesn't buy anything. As the backbone of these people, Zhang Hai actually didn't buy anything because he is not very interested in these things. He just came here to take a look. Of course, it is not that he doesn't like anything. There are some things that he likes, such as furniture. I didn't know that wooden furniture is so valuable. Looking at the set of mahogany furniture, the price is 188,888 yuan. Zhang Hai looked at it and couldn't help but laugh. What kind of toy is this? This is still considered cheap. After all, this is just ordinary mahogany, not fine red sandalwood or yellow rosewood. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Minister Qin also laughed and said, in recent years, the domestic wooden industry has been very popular. The so-called mahogany is not the same as what the average person knows. Mahogany is divided into two families, Leguminosae and Myrmecae. Leguminosae is divided into two subfamilies, Sphenoideae and Hematoxidae, which are further divided into the genera of red sandalwood, yellow sandalwood, and red bean. The Hematoxidae is the iron knife forest, the red sandalwood is divided into red sandalwood, the yellow sandalwood is divided into fragrant wood, black acid wood, and red acid wood. The Hematoxidae and the persimmon are divided into ebony and ebony. In short, if you don't play with these things, it is difficult to understand what these things are and what they represent. Even if they are all yellow rosewood, the price is very different. The price of South China Sea and South Asia Sea is different. There were a lot of twists and turns in this industry. Therefore, there was no fixed price for wood in the country. A piece of wood, you can sell it for 1 million yuan or 1 yuan, it depends on what the person thinks. Looking at the crazy furniture in China, Zhang Hai can't help but whisper, should I go back and get some trees? Just as Zhang Hai and the others were wandering around, suddenly a figure entered Zhang Hai's sight. It's him. Looking at the swaying figure in front of him, Zhang Hai can't help but be surprised. When Zhang Hai looked at that person also saw Zhang Hai and couldn't help but smile. Obviously, he also recognized Zhang Hai. Chapter 443. Hey brother, what are you doing here? Looking at Zhang Hai, a person walked over with a smile on his face and said with a surprised tone, oh, I came over to take a look, but why are you here? Hearing the man's words, Zhang Hai replied, and then asked curiously, this is my shop. The man heard Zhang Hai's words and couldn't help but smile and point behind him. As he pointed, Zhang Hai also saw a shop specializing in gems, jade, and the like. Such shops were not rare in the vicinity of Panjiayuan. Zhang Hai saw at least a dozen such shops along the way. But what surprised Zhang Hai was that this fat man said that he was in the jewelry business. Why did he open a shop here? Hey, I usually import raw materials for those big companies, but I also open a small shop to make some money. Maybe he saw the doubts in Zhang Hai's eyes, the fat man said with a smile. Yes, Zhang Hai knows this fat man. This person is not someone else. He is the fat man named Wang Yang who sat next to Zhang Hai when he came back from the plane. Hearing his words, Zhang Hai also nodded and looked at his small shop. He is worthy of being a person who can return to Huaxia in the first-class cabin in the United States without batting an eyelid. Although the location of this fat man's shop doesn't seem to be the best, the area of the shop is not small. At a glance, this shop is at least about 300 square meters in size. There are many display counters in this shop. And the things sold in these counters are all gems. Different from some literary objects, he sells hard goods here. Your shop is not small. Looking at the situation inside, Zhang Hai couldn't help but say with some emotion, hey, it's okay. Come in and sit in the shop. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Wang Yang smiled and led Zhang Hai into the shop. But as soon as they walked in, Zhang Hai's originally smiling face instantly turned into a surprised expression. He was not surprised by Fatty Wang's shop, but he was surprised that since he came to Huaxia, his scales, which had almost stopped growing, suddenly accelerated the speed of condensation, as if the spirit between heaven and earth was constantly drilling into his body. This made him very surprised and he couldn't understand what was going on. Although he wanted to explore it, now was not a good time, so he suppressed the doubts in his heart and walked into the shop with Fatty Wang. But his eyes were constantly scanning the things in the shop. He wanted to see where the spirit came from. You know, Zhang is not short of money now. The only things that can make him so excited are only two things. The first is to protect his property, such as buying oil futures, and the second is to increase his strength. The second-level dragon pattern is already quite amazing. Zhang wants to know what it will be like at the third, fourth, and fifth levels in the future. Now the dragon pattern on his body has changed from a snake to a flood dragon. Will it become a dragon next time? What will a dragon become after that? So as soon as he entered the room, Zhang Hai's eyes swept around. He was really curious. Of course, he was not the only one who was curious. Other people besides Minister Qin were also curious. Women always had no resistance to shiny things. As soon as they walked in, their eyes couldn't leave it. Come, brother. Let me introduce you. Seeing that Zhang Hai was very interested in his things, Wang Yang couldn't help but make a gesture in his heart. He called Zhang Hai in to talk and let Zhang Hai see his things. To put it bluntly, he was a businessman. He wanted to sell jade, and Zhang Hai was a very good customer. Okay. Hearing his words, Zhang Hai also smiled because he also wanted to know where the spiritual energy came from. So he followed Fatty Wang to the front of these counters. Fatty Wang's things here were indeed very complete. He immediately introduced them to Zhang Hai. His main focus here was the treasure of the store, naturally the 5 precious gems: diamond, ruby, sapphire, beryl, and emerald. But the price of these 5 gems was not cheap. A ring made of emerald could be sold for tens of thousands of yuan. Ordinary people couldn't afford it. These things were just used as signboards. The real thing was actually the other 3 gems: colorful gems, organic gems, and jade. In fact, these 3 gems were the most valuable things here. Come take a look. This is the tourmaline I told you about on the plane. It's beautiful, isn't it? This kind of thing is very popular in our country now. After introducing the 5 precious gemstones, he began to introduce the colored gemstones next to them. The colorful gems were tourmaline. This kind of thing was not very valuable in the past, but now it was very popular. However, Zhang Hai picked up a few pieces and tried them. He was sure that the spiritual energy did not come from them. Although he also liked sparkling things, this thing was not what he wanted. Seeing that Zhang Hai was not interested in tourmaline, Fatty Wang continued to introduce other stones: spinel, topaz, olivine, garnet, crystal, feldspar, tanzanite, pyroxene, cordierite, zircon. But for these stones, Zhang Hai shook his head. He felt that there was no spiritual energy in these stones. It was understandable. After all, when he went to the shipwreck, the pile of gems was not less than here. At that time, he did not feel the acceleration of the spiritual energy, let alone now. After confirming that the spiritual energy was not found by the gems, Zhang Hai looked to the side. Next, Wang Yang introduced organic gemstones. The so-called organic gemstones refer to things formed by animals or plants. They were not real stones. The most famous type of gemstone was coral. In China, the most expensive type of coral was red coral. The price wasn't cheap, but Zhang Hai also made some small discoveries about these red corals. He found that some of these coral products had some spiritual energy, but some did not. It was obvious that if there was spiritual energy, it was real, and if there was no spiritual energy, it was fake. The most important thing was that the spiritual energy was too little, so it could not be absorbed. This was just like the creatures in Zhang Hai's manor. Zhang Hai could inject spiritual energy into them, but he could not absorb it from them. To absorb spiritual energy, he could only rely on the spiritual energy between heaven and earth. That was all. Other than corals, the other things were not too valuable. For example, amber could be artificially made now. However, the really valuable things were left behind tens of thousands or even hundreds of millions of years ago. Amber was actually tree oil. If there was a bug in the tree oil, it was called amber. If there was nothing, it was called beeswax. This thing was also very popular in recent years. A good piece of beeswax was even worth hundreds of thousands. However, this thing was the same as corals. Some of them had spiritual energy, and some of them did not. However, he still could not absorb the spiritual energy. Zhang Hai was very sure that these things were not what he wanted. In addition to amber and beeswax, Zhang Hai also looked at pearls and shells. Of course, shells did not refer to any shells in the sea. They were specifically referring to the giant clam, one of the 8 treasures of Buddhism. However, these two things were also the same. They did not have any spiritual energy. Seeing Zhang Hai exclude so many things, Wang Yang was also a little speechless. Just now, he looked at Zhang Hai with some curiosity and thought that he was a big customer. Now, it seemed that he was just curious. After looking at so many things, he had no intention of buying. But as the saying goes, the people in the capital were very prideful. Since he said that he was going to introduce, he had to finish what he started. So Fatty Wong still pushed his smiling face and walked to the last area, which was the jade area. At this time, he no longer had any expectations for Zhang Hai to buy things. He just came over purely as a friend. He came over to show off to his friend. Speaking of jade, the most popular thing now was naturally jade. But to be honest, this thing was the same as a gem in Zhang Hai's eyes. It said that it had spiritual energy, but Zhang Hai did not feel any fluctuation of spiritual energy from it. In other words, Zhang Hai did not know whether it was real or fake when he bought it. For example, Zhang Hai knew whether it was real or fake, but he did not know at all. So he had no interest in jade. After leaping over the largest jade area in the jade area, Wang Yang took out a jade pendant from the cabinet and handed it to Zhang Hai to have a look. He introduced it while he was at it. This is a Hetian. But I won't lie to you. This is not produced in China. Although the quality in China is the best, I can't buy it. This is from Russia. It's a quality of green and white jade. This should have been heavily hyped in the past few years, but it has fallen recently. My stock here has also been suppressed a lot. But fortunately, recently I heard that the Imperial Court is going to apply for this thing to be our national jade. I think there will be some harvest then. Fatty Wong also said with a smile as he stuffed the jade pendant into Zhang Hai's hand. But when Zhang Hai's hand touched this piece of jade, Zhang Hai's eyes suddenly lit up. Because he instantly felt that this jade pendant contained a lot of spiritual energy. And the most important thing was that these spiritual energy were slowly entering his body through the contact of his skin. There was not much spiritual energy. The amount of spiritual energy in Zhang Hai's piece was comparable to the spiritual energy in 100 pieces of jade of this size. The reason why Zhang Hai was so shocked was that the spiritual energy in it was not simple spiritual energy. After this spiritual energy entered his body, it actually mobilized other spiritual energy, making them actively run in his body, absorbing the spiritual energy from the outside world at a faster speed. Feeling this, Zhang Hai's eyes suddenly turned green. Chapter 444. It has been almost 10 months since Zhang Hai obtained the Dragon Balls. He was very clear that his glory, splendor, wealth, and status in this world depended on it. He could lose everything except for this because this was his root, his everything. So during this time, he was not so concerned about business, nor was he so concerned about women. The only thing he was most concerned about was his spiritual aura. He had been looking for how to make his spiritual aura absorb faster and become stronger. But after searching for a long time, the only thing he found was tea leaves. But the tea leaves could only help Zhang Hai absorb about 1 or 2% more spiritual aura. Of course, if he waited for Zhang Hai's tea tree to be harvested, then his tea leaves would have a better effect. But now he had to wait. He had just planted it this year. If he wanted to harvest it, he had to wait at least until next year around the Qingming festival. Originally, he thought that his spiritual aura was estimated to be like this, and he was preparing to slowly upgrade. Suddenly he found that there was something that could speed up his spiritual aura absorption. Just such a small piece of Hetian jade could increase his spiritual aura absorption speed by about 10%. What if it was a big piece? What if he used this thing to make a room and a bed? Thinking about it, Zhang Hai's eyes couldn't help but light up. Are there any other Hetian jades? Let me see. Seeing this, Zhang Hai took the initiative to talk to Fatty Wong for the first time. Ah, yes. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Fatty Wong, who had no intention of selling things, was stunned for a moment, and then immediately took out the Hetian jades. He knew that Zhang Hai was not a person who was short of money. Zhang Hai also held these Hetian jades and felt them. According to the color, Hetian jades were divided into white jade, cyan jade, green-white jade, black jade, blue and white jade, jasper jade, topaz jade and sugar jade. Among them, white jade was the most important variety of Hetian jade, and the price was also the most expensive. And in Zhang Hai's hands, indeed, it was expensive for a reason. The most expensive white jade and cyan jade had the best absorption effect. A piece of jade that was almost the size of a palm could increase Zhang Hai's absorption speed by about 11% to 15%. The second was the green-white jade, which was the one just now, which increased it by about 8% to 10%. Then there was the black jade at 5%, the blue jade at 3%, the jasper at 2%, and the topaz at 2%. Zhang Hai could only feel the spiritual aura in the jade, but he could not absorb it. This proved that white jade and cyan jade were the best for Zhang Hai. Putting down these Hetian jades, Zhang Hai didn't feel anxious. Instead, he went to look at the other jades. Opal, fine jade, Dushan jade, Charo stone, Narfeldspar jade, emerald stone, lapis lazuli, malachite, grapestone, fluorite, bloodstone, Shoshan stone, Qingtian stone, different pole ore, sea grain stone, Suji stone. Wang Yang's place was indeed specialized in these things. There were many stones that Zhang Hai had never heard of, but he had them all here. After all, Zhang Hai was just a layman. He was far from being as skilled as Wang Yang. Among these stones, Zhang Hai also found some. The bloodstone, Qingtian stone, and sea grain stone in these jades were all beneficial to his spiritual aura collection. But unfortunately, these spiritual auras were very little, far less than the Hetian jade that gave Zhang Hai a strong feeling. I want this kind of Hetian jade, as long as it is green and white. Raw stones are also fine. I don't know if brother can get it. Touching these Hetian jades in front of him, Zhang Hai asked Fatty Wang. He was really tempted this time. Oh, you want raw stones? Forgive me for asking, but what do you want so much Hetian jade for? Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Wang Yang froze for a moment. The imagined excitement did not appear on his face. Instead, he looked at Zhang Hai with some worry. Hee, brother, you don't have to worry too much. I don't plan to enter this industry. I just plan to use this thing to decorate my home. Hearing his words, Zhang Hai said with a smile, and then his eyes began to shine. Decorate? Decorate with this thing? Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Fatty Wang couldn't help but be a little confused. What's going on? Well, with this equipment, I am going to make my room's walls and floor into this kind of jade. My bed will also be made into this kind of jade. I will also make pillows and a few reclining chairs. Since this kind of jade was beneficial to his advancement, Zhang Hai would not let it go. Is he short of money now? He is not short of money, so he wants to make it the best. Oil futures can be temporarily put aside. This thing is the most important. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Wang Yang, Minister Qin, and even Qi Li were stunned. Is Zhang Hai crazy? Why did he make his home like this? Is he going to sleep on the jade? Doesn't he feel nervous? Zhang Hai. Looking at Zhang Hai, who seems to have lost his mind, Qi Li couldn't help but pull his sleeve. I'm fine. This jade is very useful to me. Brother, just tell me if you can get it. Looking at Wang Yang, Zhang Hai said with a smile, Zhang Hai will not let go of anything that can improve his spiritual aura. Is there a requirement for the place of origin? Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Fatty Wang was sure that Zhang Hai was not joking with him. If it is true, then it will be a big business. But if Zhang Hai only wants domestic jade, then he can't do anything. Basically, more than 70% of the domestic Hetian jade was taken up by other big businesses. He could only get a little. That was why Fatty Wang expanded more of his business overseas, because there were still a lot of empty markets there. No requirements, but I only want this kind of green jade and white jade. Hearing Fatty Wang's words, Zhang Hai also said seriously. Just now, he tried Hetian jade from different places. In fact, for Zhang Hai, the difference is not big. At present in the world, there are only a few places that produce Hetian jade. In addition to the producing provinces, Huaxia's Qing province, Soviet Russia, Canada, Taiwan province, and nearby Korea and Shu province all produce Hetian jade. However, because of the different places of origin, the price and name are also very different. For example, Soviet Russia is called Russian material. Qing province is called Qing material. The average quality is the best in Xian province, but this is just average. After all, there are good and bad everywhere. It is impossible that the worst in this place is better than the best in that place. What's more, what Zhonghai wants is the best. Like Hetian jade and jade, it is divided into two categories. One is the collection material, which is the jade that has been produced. It can be directly processed or directly collected. This kind of material was naturally very expensive, and the other kind was the processing material. The jadeite was called half-raw stone, which was the stone material that had been picked and confirmed to have the goods inside. The former was naturally the same, and the latter was more or less a gambling element. Hearing Zhonghai's words, Fatty Wong has already begun to calculate in his heart. The material that Zhonghai wants is the best, which is the top-level material. If it is calculated according to Zhonghai's price, the price is too high. A piece of top-level Hetian jade card is sold here for 65,000 renminbi. The weight is about half a tael, about 25 grams, which is equivalent to 2,600 yuan per gram. This is not carved by a master. Of course, Zhonghai doesn't want a master to carve it. What he wants is a whole piece of Hetian jade to make a floor, a bed, a pillow, a recliner. There is no need for a master to carve, nor any crafting fee, only the jade money. That kilogram is 2.6 million renminbi. Zhonghai wants to make a bed. According to the calculation of 2 meters by 2 meters, this bed needs to use at least 50 kilograms of material. Of course, this is counting the price of the legs and the bedboard under the bed, which is made of wood. Only the bed surface and the head of the bed are made of jade. Not counting the crafting fee, it is worth 130 million renminbi. Of course, it can't be sold at the retail price. However, even if a gram is 1,600 yuan, minus 1,000 yuan, the material cost of 50 kilograms is 80 million renminbi. This is just a bed. If you include the recliner and the floor, Fatty Wong can't help but take a breath. It seems that he is going to make a fortune. I want a bed, a big bed, 100 kilograms of material. The floor should be spread all over my room. The size is different, but it must be solid. I also want 3 recliners and 4 pillows. No matter how Fatty Wong calculates, Zhonghai says what he wants. 100 kilograms of material is 160 million renminbi. The floor in the room, of course, does not include the bathroom and the small living room in his room. Only his room is about 30 square meters. According to the thinner jade material, 1 square meter is 3 kilograms. 30 square meters is about 100 kilograms, which is 320 million renminbi. In addition to the 3 reclining chairs, 1 on the balcony, 1 in the front yard, and 1 in the backyard. Each reclining chair weighs at least 20 kilograms, which makes it 60 kilograms, which makes it 96 million yuan. Altogether, it's 416 million yuan. Even if you round it up and give the pillow to Zhonghai, and you don't need to pay for the labor, it's still 410 million yuan. Thinking of this, Wang Yang can't help swallowing a mouthful of saliva subconsciously. To be honest, he is a little surprised. Zhonghai, you have to think about it. This is not a small amount of money. This is a deal worth hundreds of millions. At this time, Minister Qin, who has been listening for a long time, hesitated and said to Zhonghai, to be honest, he is not very interested in these things. To be honest, he feels that it is unnecessary to spend hundreds of millions of RMB to sleep on jade and step on jade. But he really doesn't understand why Zhonghai does this. Hearing his words, Zhonghai just smiled and did not explain more. If that's the case, I'll take a step back. I'll make all of them into top-grade processed white jade. They're collectible. I'm sure you know that you can't afford them. 1 gram costs tens of thousands of yuan. But those stones are the same as these stones. It's just that they're naturally formed and are very valuable. I will give you 1,500 renminbi for 1 gram. According to you, you need at least 250 kilograms of material, which is about 375 million renminbi. It can only be higher than this, not lower. Are you really going to buy it? You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.